Hello and welcome back to the KCC channel. I'm Rob and I hope you're having a wonderful day today. Today we continue with the compilation videos which are aimed at people who are working or people who are driving or people who just have a heck of a lot of time and want something on in the background. Please check out the KCC Discord linked in the description down below. There you can talk to me and a whole bunch of KCC fans who hang out there on a regular basis. I look forward to seeing you there. Today we're jumping into some malicious compliance. Our first story today comes to us from, this name right here. Stop treating me like a kid. Let's jump right in. This malicious compliance was on the part of my mom. It was almost 19 years ago now, but I thought you all might find it mildly amusing. I'm sure there are similar stories of parents doing this same thing. My youngest brother was lazy when he was in his early teens. This occurred during summer break from school. Our parents required us to be in bed at 10 p.m. on weekdays, even during breaks from school, since our dad had to leave for work at 5:30 a.m. This had been a rule for years. My mom was a stay-at-home mom who busted her butt doing household stuff for all of us that she didn't have to do, but she enjoyed seeing her family happy. My little brother had recently had his 14th birthday a couple days before, and was lucky enough to have been gifted an Xbox and 2 games he very much wanted. In our family, this was a big deal, because our parents, well, not poor, weren't exactly flush with money and had saved up for it by cutting coupons and cutting back on luxuries they enjoyed. One day during this break, my 14-year-old brother was up playing his newly acquired Xbox still, hadn't gotten ready for bed yet, and it was coming up on 10 p.m. I had already gotten ready and was reading a book. Being in post-secondary at the time, I thought it common courtesy to be quiet since I'm living there for free. My mom tells my brother he has to go to bed and to please turn off the game. Suddenly, the Xbox seems to be the reason he didn't like the rules anymore. Mom, looking very annoyed at my ungrateful brother, tells him it's not an option and that he's going to bed now. But why does he get to stay up? That's not fair. He, as in me, his college-age brother. Because he's an adult, that's why, and you're going to bed this instant. No, stop treating me like a kid. I'm not a little kid anymore. I see my mom get a funny look on her face. She smiles. I have no idea what's going on at this point, and I'm pretty surprised because usually by this point, she'd bring down the sanctions hammer and possibly take away the Xbox. But she doesn't. She simply says, okay, and goes to the kitchen, where I see her whispering something to our dad, but I'm too far away to hear. Dad goes into the garage where he keeps his woodworking stuff and returns with earplugs in his hand, and our parents go to bed. I head to sleep almost an hour later. My little bro is still gaming away. The next morning, my little brother doesn't get up until just before noon and has some cereal. Then dinner time comes. Mom had made an eggplant casserole. My brother hated eggplant. Normally, she'd make something else for him. Not this time. Where's my food? Oh, there's some ingredients in the pantry for you to make dinner with. My brother ends up eating cereal again because he can't figure out what he's supposed to do. A few days later, he's got no clean clothes left. Mom, I have nothing to wear. Mom, smiling like the Cheshire Cat. I usually do my laundry on Fridays. Which day would you like to use the laundry machines? But how about Saturdays? They're free that day. Oh look, today is a Saturday. Feel free to use them. And she walks out of the room to go lay on the patio and read. As she goes through the kitchen, she passes by my dad and they both laugh. My bro continues to wear his clothes saturated with teenage stank instead. Gross. At dinner, my parents announced they're taking us to a matinee showing on Sunday morning of Terminator. I think it was the third one. My brother really wanted to go. My mom said we'd like to go at 10 a.m. for the 10:30 showing. To the best of my memory, it was sometime in the late morning. Well, my little bro stayed up super late again playing Xbox. It was almost time to leave, and my brother still wasn't awake. Normally, our mom would have asked him to go to bed at midnight on a weekend, but dear malicious compliance mom decided she didn't feel like stressing herself out with arguing with him. As we're putting our shoes on, I go, hey, is it just us? Well, we all knew the time in advance. Don't worry, your brother will be fine. Dad smiles at my mom. He's gonna be so mad. The rest of us go enjoy the movie, including our other brother. Then our parents take us out to lunch. We get back home around 2 p.m. or something like that, and little bro comes practically running down the stairs, still in his stank butt clothes that haven't been washed, with tears in his eyes. "How come you went without me? I wanted to see Terminator 2. That really sucks. The other adults went to bed on time. You asked me to not treat you like a kid anymore. Sorry that you missed it. Maybe if you ask the neighbors if they need their lawn mowed, you can make enough to buy a movie ticket and bus ticket to get there." He just looked at her and cried harder. My little bro and my parents went to talk. Apparently, my bro had cereal for lunch while we went to a sit-down restaurant, and he was salty about that too. That night, my brother went to bed at 10 p.m. sharp. As a bonus, Mom taught him how to do his own laundry and basic cooking skills over the next month. He seemed happier, started thanking my mom on the time she did stuff for him, and my mom eventually told him she was really proud he decided to be respectful of the rest of the family. My parents were so happy about his change in attitude that my mom took him and a friend of his to see the movie. It was still playing in the cheap theaters. Well, OP, I like how Mom allowed your brother to fail a little bit at home to realize just how much the adults actually do. Now, sometimes my kids will look at me and say, "I can't wait to be an adult," and I just sit back and think, wow, you're in for a rude awakening. Do me a quick favor and take a look down below the video. If that subscribe button's still red, it means you're actually not subscribed to the KCC channel. Please hit that subscribe button for more daily Reddit stories. This next story comes to us from United States of... really? The lunch break is for eating, so go back to work. Let's jump right in. My ex-employer would send me out on errands all the time, to the point where my lunchtime was over by the time I got back to the office. Many times, I would usually skip out on lunch because I personally did not have an appetite. One day, I had to go submit some of the company documents somewhere, and we were understaffed. So we agreed it's best I go during lunchtime. I submitted the documents and grabbed some lunch from a takeaway. I did not eat the lunch. I simply got it in a takeaway bag and got transport to work immediately. I arrived with only 5 minutes to spare, and I was particularly hungry that day. I tried to eat as fast as possible, and she was just talking to me the whole time, so I can't chew and speak at the same time. At exactly 3:01, she tells me, "The lunch hour is for you to get lunch and eat it. If you cannot finish your food on time, don't eat it during work hours. Also, please refrain from eating in the work area." 1. I was eating by the microwave because we do not have a designated lunch area. 2. The store, place of employment, was completely empty. I could have used a good 10 minutes to finish up. 3. I didn't have time to eat because I was running your errands. Cue malicious compliance. One day, it was lunchtime, and I wasn't feeling particularly hungry, so I'm standing by the cash register. My boss rushes in, exclaiming how she has a lot to do, and we need to get the stock out of her car as fast as possible so she can go to her next meeting. "Will somebody please help me?" No one responded. "OP, you'll help me get the stock out of the car, right?" I would, but lunchtime is for eating. I took a piece of gum and a bottle of water and stood in the parking lot for the whole hour, watching her struggle with stock and look flustered. Not my problem. OP, never do work during a scheduled break, especially one that you're not being paid for. If it's an hour-long lunch break and you're not making any money, why would you continue doing things for the company? This next story today comes to us from Volda Nope. "I have to squeeze past you to get off the bus? Okay, let's jump right in." This is my tiny malicious compliance story, which happened in my first year at uni about 8 years ago. The bus I, then 20 female, had to take to uni was the most popular route in town, meaning it was always packed. Because I got on at the first stop, I always had a window seat, which meant that someone was usually sitting next to me when I had to get off. And I had to do the awkward thing of lifting my backpack and straightening up in an exaggerated fashion to show them that they had to stand to let me pass. No problem usually, just a bit awkward for socially awkward me. One morning, a guy in his 40s sat next to me and promptly man-spreaded across my seat, pushing his leg right up to mine. I thought it was weird, but hey, maybe this guy had a painfully swollen scrotum or no self-awareness, or both. Anyway, I was giving him the benefit of the doubt. and as he was focused on his phone and ignored me, I did the same for the rest of the journey. Then, when we were getting close to my stop, I started the awkward, "I have to get off, so let me pass" show. No reaction. So I stood up from my seat. Still no reaction. "Sir," no reaction. I tapped his shoulder. "Sir, I need to get off. Can you let me pass?" The guy looked up at me and, with the widest, most disgusting grin, said, "Well, sweetie, looks like you're gonna have to squeeze past me. No problem for such a skinny girl, right?" Some of the passengers standing around us noticed and were about to intervene. But I was pissed, because at that point I had missed my stop, and I wasn't sure if he was a pervert or just liked to piss on people's days. But I didn't want him to win. Also, no one had ever called me skinny. I have what one would call childbearing hips, thank you very much. So I smiled at him and said, "Okay, have it your way." My backpack was filled with a half a dozen library books that I was going to return that day, and it was bulky and heavy AF. Usually, I would have put it on after leaving the crowded bus, but not that day. I shouldered my backpack so it was hanging at the right height, and clumsily, forcefully, and, just in case he was indeed a pervert, in no way sexually squeezed past the guy, dragging my huge backpack across his face. If I leant back to make sure to really get his nose, well, that surely wasn't intentional. And if he emitted any pain-fueled protest, well, they must have been muffled by my backpack. As I was standing by the door waiting for the next stop, I looked back to see him covering his nose with his hand. It looked like he was checking if it was bleeding, but I don't think he did. He might have had a scratch or two from my backpack, but he wasn't injured or anything. His pride was, though. He kept glaring at me for the glorious half minute it took for the bus to reach the next stop. I was in such a good mood that I didn't mind walking back to where I was supposed to get off. Oh, OP, don't you wish this was one of those situations where you could fart on command? Like cabbage-smelling farts, you know? Really crop dust 'em good on your way out? That would have been epic. This next story comes to us from Griselda Loves Cats. Don't even say hi to them. Let's jump right in. Many years ago, I was the junior manager at a restaurant known for sausage and older customers. A few weeks into my training, one of the senior VPs at the company decided to hire his mistress to redesign the decor in the stores in my area. Y'all, never ever let your side piece take part in your job. She had no qualifications and the worst taste. Truly abominable color and pattern combinations. Picture pink floral wallpaper, geometric orange carpet, and baby crap brown and green on the chairs and booths. I cannot adequately describe the atrocity of her designs. She also was moving display cases where things were in the kitchen and grill areas and more. All of this was to be done at night so that we didn't have to close during operational hours. I was the one who had to stay all night while they made all these changes. 2 weeks of working all night supervising. I was horrified at the plans and told my boss, who agreed with me. He then told me to just read a book or something, so I couldn't be accused of sabotaging the design. This had just happened at the 2 stores that were remodeled before ours was. My manager then told me I was not to even speak to the workmen unless they were taking food or restaurant supplies out of the building. I clarified that he meant not saying hi or anything else to them for any reason, including good manners or work that had a serious problem. Another manager got fired for talking too much with the workmen, and then objecting to the hideous new decor, because corporate was that awful to managers. A couple of nights later, I noticed that the workmen are obviously not doing things right, not because things looked hideous, but because they were doing a crap job of it. They had to move some of the electrical outlets, and several of them were smoking after they put the outlet covers on. They also shot sparks when you plugged anything in. I didn't say a word. After all, I wasn't allowed to talk to the workers unless they were stealing food or restaurant supplies. So I ignored it. When the GM came in, he tried to plug in the calculator in the office that the workmen moved. It shot out sparks. He then asked me why I didn't inspect everything the electrician did and insist he redo the outlets because of the shoddy workmanship. He also got upset the day the wallpaper was hung. A couple of strips were upside down. The edges were curling, and overall, it just looked horrible. The trim that they painted had lots of drips and splatters and missed spots. It was just a mess. Boss was far from happy that I didn't monitor the quality of the work, that I had no authority to do anything about. I was just there to keep them from stealing. I told boss that he said I was not to talk to the workers unless they were stealing food or other restaurant supplies. I also mentioned that I was not a building or electrical inspector, so how should I know if they did a bad job? I didn't tell him that my parents taught me to redecorate and remodel. Dad was a shop teacher and does not see gender as a reason not to learn life skills. In our family, fixing it yourself is a life skill. When the district manager came in to see the final results, nothing was fixed because even my GM didn't have the authority to make the workers redo anything for any reason. He was furious. It really looked that bad. We had the CEO coming in to inspect later that day. It was awesome. I got called onto the carpet for allowing the workmen to do such a bad job. My GM's head exploded when I told the district manager that I was not even supposed to say hi to the workmen, much less criticize anything they were doing, per a direct statement from my GM. I did not get into any trouble, and the district manager thought it was hilarious, except for the part where we were left with a store that looked atrocious and had entire sections where the electrical work was bad enough that we were afraid the store would burn down. It legit was that bad. We got a new crew of workers, and I got to spend 10 more days supervising the workers. Easiest month on that job. Getting paid to read and chill and nap. Well, who wouldn't want that? OP, not gonna lie, when you first mentioned that there was a restaurant known for sausage and older customers, my mind went immediately to Chippendales, but I know that's not where this was going. I have one pretty big question about this story though. Where were the permits and the inspections afterwards? Because a big company with multiple locations would definitely have people come in to look at that stuff, right? Tell me they would. This next story comes to us from Biohazard5656. Just worry about your work and not mine. Let's jump right in. This was my first job in manufacturing, making laser in my 20s. The company was hiring a bunch of folks so they could start a second shift to make the order deadline. Plus, they had a new line coming into production, so they wanted senior staff on that and the new folks on the older line. I was around the first new people to get hired. I'm not a dumb person and take pride in my work. I also like helping others because, well, I'm not a piece of crap. But I'm also okay with letting people get what they deserve when they are not nice people. Anyway, a new guy gets hired to work next to me, and of course, it's someone much older. Late 50s to early 60s who worked at insert big company name here and didn't need to be told by me when he was messing up. He would make obvious mistakes that to fix would require you to disassemble it to fix it if you caught it later. I would see him make these mistakes and point them out to avoid the time needed later to take it apart and fix it. After a few times of pointing out his mistakes, he freaks out and says it was because of me that he was making these mistakes and that I should just worry about my work. And now, the malicious compliance. I eventually started working at the next step, where you filled the laser with gas and run it. The other guy built them and I ran them. Well, he was much slower at building them than I was, so naturally we would have to wait. One day, I had no work and was told to just wait till he built the next laser for me. So I did. But here's the kicker. The step before him built it wrong. There were different features depending on the type of laser it was, and I could see that from a distance. Well, I waited over an hour for him to build this thing. He could see me and knew I was waiting on him. Finally, he finishes the laser and moves it to the shelf where I get them from. He doesn't say a word to me, but looks right at me like, "Here you go, you can finally do some work." I stand up, grab a yellow failure sheet, and start filling it out. I walk over to the laser, put the sheet in there, and walk away. Mind you, he was watching me the whole time. He gets up, reads the paper, turns to me and goes, "You knew this was wrong the whole darn time, didn't you?" Which I replied, "I'm just minding my own business, worrying about me." Another time. The lasers needed water to cool them and had hoses that were attached to the laser and the other to a quick release end. We didn't have air in our area to purge the lasers, so we needed to bring them to another area to do so. This was important if they needed to be taken apart because there would still be water in there under pressure. Well, my cell lead failed a laser and just put it on the shelf to be taken apart. Now, I always would check the lines for water by pushing the nipple into a trash can, because it's the smart thing to do. Well, guess who didn't check when taking it apart? I got to watch water explode all over him as he took the water manifold apart. He turned to me, laughing of course, and goes, "You knew about this the whole time, didn't you?" To which I replied, "Again, I'm just worrying about me and minding my own business." He didn't see who failed the unit, so he immediately grabbed the sheet. I assumed to see if it was me and try to get me in trouble, only to find out it was the cell lead and couldn't do anything about it. Just because you're more than twice my age doesn't mean you know it all and can't make mistakes. The fallout. I got tired of working at a place that seemed to think older people were better than younger people when every mistake was his and not mine. I got a different job. OP giving that failure notice without even testing the item he built, that was absolutely amazing. I can only imagine the look on his face when you walked over with that paper, put it on, and just turned around and smugly walked away. Well done. This next story comes to us from Rabid Rathian. Don't fix a problem that will cost the store a lot of money? You got it. Let's jump right in. Another tale from many years ago at my retail job. I was working in the fitting rooms on a Sunday morning at about 11:45, when it was still relatively quiet. Usually it gets really busy from 12 p.m. onwards. And though the store manager had given me a rail of last season's clothes to mark down, I still had to keep the fitting rooms tidy and free of returns, and was starting on the back foot because the person who'd been in there on Saturday night had left a whole trolley of stuff I had to sort out and hang up before I could put it away. So I was focusing more on the returns, but anytime I had to go back in and answer the phones, I'd do another section of markdowns on the rail. Just after I'd put some footwear returns away and was heading back to the fitting room, I noticed a pretty significant problem in the footwear section. I took 2 to 3 steps towards it to go fix it, only to be accosted by the store manager coming around the corner. "OP, what are you doing?" I just finished putting some returns away and "Have you finished those markdowns I asked you to do?" "Not yet, but well, get back in there and do it." "I'm going to, but I just need to." "No, you don't. Just need to do anything except the job I'm paying you for. Now get back in there, do those markdowns, and stop wasting time wandering around out here." Okay. Goes back to fitting rooms. Over the next half hour or so, I could hear the store manager being paged to go to the front registers a lot. This might usually happen once a shift, if that, but from what I could hear over the PA system, she was having to go up there every 5 minutes. At 12:30, she comes storming into the fitting rooms. "Who was working stock and footwear?" "I don't know." "Well, find out. They put out some new boots but didn't take the price down for the thongs that were there before." Side note to non-Australians, when I say thongs, I'm talking about the rubber footwear worn in summer, not the skimpy underwear. "So I've just had to let nearly all those pairs of $50 boots go through for $12. "Oh, yeah?" "What do you mean, oh yeah?" "I saw the price was wrong earlier." "Well, why didn't you fix it?" "I tried to, and I tried to tell you it was wrong, but you told me to stop wasting time and get back in the fitting rooms." Manager slowly goes redder than Barnaby Joyce. No real fallout for me, but apparently the footwear stock worker got torn a new one when they came back from their break. I'd like to say the store manager learned from her mistake. The problem could have been identified and fixed a lot earlier, and therefore a lot more cheaply before 10 to 15 customers took advantage of the price screw up if she hadn't decided to go on a power trip. But anyone who has worked with managers like that knows she learned absolutely nothing. OP in a comment down below added in another example from the same manager. She told me to go and recover, tidy up the intimate apparel section, but when I tried telling her another staff member had just finished doing that, so the area was pretty much spotless, she had a go at me about trying to get out of doing work and told me to go and recover it anyway. I was bored to tears because there was no work in that section to do. So I kept going across to the kidswear section to help the person working in there because it was a mess and they were struggling. Store manager saw me doing that twice and shouted at me to go back to the intimate apparel section, and that if she saw me outside my area again, I'd get counseled. I dawdled around the section playing Pokemon Go for the remaining 2 hours of my shift. At the end, she came up, looked around the intimate apparel department and said, "See, you managed to get it looking nice after all. Wasn't so hard, was it?" And then proceeded to go and have a go at the kidswear section worker for still having several aisles left to cover. Okay, at what point are you allowed to just go right up to your manager and just ask them straight out, were you born stupid, or are you just making an effort? I also want to mention here that somebody absolutely dropped the ball. I mean, we're talking retail 101. Customer claims the price was marked wrong, you take them back to the shelf and have them show you. You agree that it was wrong and you honor the price for that one customer. Then you grab the sign and take it with you so you don't get screwed by many more people. This next story comes to us from Isaac of Lego. Just get it done. It'll be fine. Let's jump right in. I work at a robotic systems company. We design and build systems at our warehouse and then ship and install it at the customer's facility. My job is to assemble and wire the system at our end and another team installs. So I got this story secondhand. The product was for a large food company and it basically sorted finished food products and stacked them on pallets. The customer already had 2 of these machines, and the new one was going to be integrated into the same computer system that the other 2 were running off of. The project manager, I'll call him Guy, was not a very smart dude and was not well liked. He had personal connections to the customer. He decided that, to make them happy, he would throw in a few extra features in the program. But he also decided there was no need to tell upper management, because that would bump the price up considerably. And so he emails my coworker John, the programmer. "Hey John, I have some things that need to be added to the code for this job, but we need to keep this one off the books." He then explains what he promised to the customer. "I don't know if that's a good idea," he said hesitantly. "It could cause serious problems with the pre-existing system." "No, it'll be fine, just get it done." John wasn't a fan of this, but at this point, he knew it wasn't a good idea to disagree with Guy. He decided that if something went terribly wrong, he had the emails to back him up. And hey, if something did go wrong, maybe Guy will actually get punished more than just a slap on the wrist. Anyway, he wrote the software and sent it off. We finished building the machine at our warehouse and had it tested. Everything checked out. So we packed it up and shipped it across the country to be reassembled by the install team and plugged into the original system. And the new program is downloaded. Catastrophic failure. The entire system goes down. This machine is the last step of the production line for the food company. This means that the entire facility is shut down until this system is up and running. And because it's a food place that deals with refrigerated food, this means that all the product going through this factory is spoiled. It took them 48 hours to fix this and get it running again. It ended up costing the customer tens of thousands of dollars in food product and lost revenue. Needless to say, Guy lost his job. No one was sad to see him go, but John is still at the company with not much more than a stern talking to. There's a quote I heard one time, but I can't remember where it's from. It's that sometimes what you get free costs you entirely too much. This is also another great example of making sure you keep documentation of everything while you're at work, because you never know when you're going to have to cover your own butt. This next story today comes to us from Naya Sonad. We're going to court? Okay, let's jump right in. The setting, United States, northern neck of Virginia. The situation, bought land and built a house on it. Back when my wife and I were much more newlywed than we are now, we hired ourselves an architect and went whole hog on having our cozy little dream home designed. While this was being done, we went shopping around for a parcel of land on which to have it built, which went quickly and easily, and we even got a pretty nice deal on a half-acre lot that was just far enough back in the sticks for us to be happy, but close enough to our jobs that it wasn't much of a commute. Best part of all, no homeowners association. There weren't any active back in that area because, point blank, it was full of poor people back there, dirt poor country types, and working poor wage slave types. We made very sure with our lawyer that no previous owner had ever had the title amended to allow for any HOA nonsense as well, because that's a thing some real estate developers like to do. They'll buy up a property, get the title amended, and force the membership of that property into a local HOA that they usually operate or are in cahoots with those that do, and then resell it with that as a new requirement for any prospective buyer to automatically agree to when they sign the title. Flash forward to August 2019. COVID was just around the corner, but nobody knew that yet. Everything was that which passes for normal out in those parts, and my wife and I had since moved to a different location, but retained that property as one of our various rentals. It was our dream home for several years, and we loved the place. Moving was tough. It was a good neighborhood out there, and folks were very welcoming. Then a company that's totally not named Ryan Homes or anything even slightly similar came in and spent some years buying everything up back there that got the market and pressuring folks into selling, which worked out for them only too well. And of course, they gentrified everything. For 3 years and some change, there was massive amounts of the old being torn down and hauled out, and the new being built up and sold. The HOA was built right in, because of course it was. Folks with money enough to throw down on crappily built houses that looked nice from the front moved in 1 by 1 and 2 by 2. Property values in the area skyrocketed. Property taxes skyrocketed right along with them, and more of the less poor people were forced to sell because they got taxed out of their own homes. My wife and I knew what was coming from the get-go. We knew those dinguses from totally not Ryan Homes were going to come sniffing around our way, not to try to buy us out, but to see if they could finagle, schmooze, or threaten us into joining the HOA they were installing. It was inevitable. Lots of information is public record. They knew we had money. They knew we were living below our means by 2 orders of magnitude. They knew we clearly meant to be exactly where we were because we sure didn't have to be. They knew that they didn't have a snowflake's hope in hell of pricing us out on taxes. So they tried nagging us to death and coming right up to the line on harassment, always to talk to us about joining the HOA. They failed. They got told by one expensive lawyer to find something else to do before we all got super busy helping them find things to worry about, and so they desisted for some years. Then my wife and I moved and got the property set up as a rental. Absolutely not Ryan Homes starts bothering our tenants there, both trying to get them to pressure us into putting the property into the HOA, as well as getting our tenants riled up with the most outrageous lies about what could happen if we, the owners, don't protect our renters better. My wife and I were livid after hearing about this crap, and so we got a hold of Definitely Not Ryan Homes to let them know that this was our formal request that they stop bothering our tenants, and that all further communications would be from our really expensive lawyer. They must have assumed we were bluffing, or maybe whoever was in charge of thinking that day didn't show up for work because they just kept right on with their nonsense. It got so bad that they were even sending fake but convincing looking envelopes with eviction notice that, upon being opened, said, could be what you would find in your mailbox one day without our wondrous HOA, and containing information about the benefits of the HOA. We gathered it all up and got the tenants to talk to our lawyer and got the police involved to get the ball rolling on a harassment investigation. Another formal request to cease and desist was sent to Never Ryan Homes by the very expensive lawyer, which they utterly ignored. I think their guy that's supposed to come to work and think about things quit a long time ago. Maybe he never told anyone. Maybe nobody noticed. Whatever the situation on their end, when my lawyer talked to their lawyer told my lawyer that their client was doing everything legally, and that if we wanted to pursue the matter in court, that was what we'd have to do. So, we did. I'm not sure what kind of lawyer magic my lawyer and his fellow legal demons worked on this front, but we were in court for 1 single hour when my lawyer and their 4 lawyers and the judge had a private talk after the preliminary hearing. Half an hour later, and the lawyers from maybe Ryan Homes came back into the courtroom looking like a quartet of cats that had been pissed on. My lawyer takes a seat beside me and says, they're going to settle, and I was like, I didn't think we were that far along into this yet, what happened? And he said, they built 51 homes in County of Concern over 2 years. Every single one of them was inspected before close of sale by a real estate agent that never actually got around to getting her home inspector license. And that's how Was It Ryan Homes the whole time paid me 10 grand to not sue them while they got bent over by the county and the state and tag team like the new boy with the pretty lips in a prison yard. I guess they found out that signing legal documents without the appropriate authority to do so is kind of frowned upon sometimes, maybe just a little bit. But unfortunately, only when they get caught. OP probably could have done a lot more damage in this case if they'd sent a letter to everyone in that HOA saying, hey, it's class action lawsuit time. This next story comes to us from Game of Thrones Addict. I'm a bad employee? Okay, let's jump right in. This happened a couple of years ago. I just still feel angry every once in a while about my time with this company and working for my managers for multiple reasons. This may or may not fit exactly malicious compliance, but it felt good to do so. So for about 8 months, I worked at one location of an office supply chain store. My position was a tech sales supervisor. Essentially, when someone comes up for a computer, printer, label maker, etc., pretty much everything electronic that the store sells, I help customers and answer questions. During that time of helping, we have to ask a series of questions, trying to get at upselling other things in the store, and also our in-store warranties to convince them to buy more things. So essentially, the company can make a bigger profit off of each customer. My direct manager was overseeing the sales of the entire store, and since my department was where the big ticket items were, he worked more extensively with my coworkers and me in that department more than most others. And since I was the supervisor of that department, that meant he would hound me the most often. Now, I admit that I quickly realized I didn't have a strong sales skill, which is one of the things that led to the eventual decision to leave. Though how he treated me was also a strong reason too. He and I had very different personalities that conflicted, or rather, he was too conflicting in and of himself and he didn't realize it. Examples include, I could count on 2 hands how often he would confide in me that he doesn't know why customers would turn him down when he tries to upsell to them and only buy the things that they came in for and nothing else. Then, in the next breath, 10 minutes later, when I would talk with the customer, he'd complain that I'm not succeeding at the very same thing he was ranting about him struggling with just moments before. He would list 5 to 10 things for me to get done that day. I'd start working on them, but later he would find me and complain that I'm not doing what I should be doing, and part of my job is severely lacking, even though I was doing what he told me to do that morning. They seem to limit the number of employees down to, most of the time during the week, only one person on each department or station at any given time. That would lead to me missing sales opportunities because I was with one customer already and another would walk in and just grab something in my department and go buy it. Every other time this would happen, he'd complain I missed another opportunity. Even when I explained to him why, that didn't seem to matter to his small brain. Not being able to clone myself and be in 2 places at once is a flaw that can be held against me. One day, I walked into work and realized the day before, my sales manager made a huge sale with a computer. A couple of software items that needed to be installed, in which it was in the process of doing since it was hooked up from the day before. Normally, with certain items being installed, we work with a third-party IT company that works with the computer remotely to set things up. During this particular time and computer though, there was some issue with one of the software pieces that the customer bought, and the IT department was having a hard time in setting it up. It ended up taking all day, and the customers eventually got tired of waiting and just returned everything. That of course made my sales manager pissed when I told him. And of course, within a week, I got my first official write-up. With the write-up, it was with my sales manager and the store manager. During the write-up conversation, my sales manager brought up all the examples as mentioned earlier as why the write-up was happening. He brought up my sales ability was severely lacking when it came to the in-store warranties, as well as upselling other things. He brought up me missing opportunities with customers I didn't talk to at all. He brought up that I didn't get things done that needed to be done. In this whole time, I was contemplating my response when he was outlining why I was the subject of this disciplinary meeting, thinking that this could be a result of what happened the week before. After he was finished, I began asking my own questions. The first response being that, those are good points. However, you did mention my sales ability. How is it that you're using that as one of the reasons when you yourself have told me that even you're struggling to get the customers you've talked to bite on and buy more than what they came in for? He acted taken aback for a moment before asking what I meant. I retorted with, "Oh, you don't remember the times in which you told me yourself you don't know why customers aren't buying things from you, the person who's twice my age and has been here for 20 years? He became a bit frustrated with my smart butt remark and said, "This meeting isn't about me at all. Let's stay focused here," as he goes off about the other points he made as well, trying to get off that subject quickly, during which time the store manager had yet to say anything. After he is done speaking, I brought up another point he made. "You say I missed opportunities with customers even when I didn't speak to them. The only reason as to why I would do that is because I would be talking to another customer that came in first. I'm not about to ditch one customer just to start chatting up another." I would think that doesn't look professional on my part. We severely need more than just one person in my department at any given moment if that's something that corporate is upset about. And that would even help me with not getting certain things done as well. Getting increasingly flustered, he cut me off there and stated, "It's not in the budget at this time to increase other people's hours. With you being the only full-time employee in your department, it's expected that you are the one who has to work, and it's on your shoulders to keep your department in good shape, and apparently you're not able to. Maybe this isn't the best job for you if you can't keep up." The managers pressured me to sign their write-up form to acknowledge that we all went over this. After that, I was fuming mad and took my first 15-minute break for the day to calm myself down, knowing that nothing would be changed. Fighting this would be a moot point. After about a month's time of looking, I found another job which was going to start me the following week. That next day, I walked in, went up to the sales manager, and handed my company-provided t-shirts and quit. He acted all shocked, stating, "But we need you. Your shift starts in 10 minutes. I sighed and stared at him saying, "You know what? I thought about what you said and you were right. I'm not up for this job." Then I turned back and left. This was February of 2020 when this happened. I went to that store recently just out of curiosity and to buy some ink for my printer, and there were not even 5 customers in the store, including myself. There wasn't even anyone working in my old department from what I saw. Guess they didn't replace me either. Talked to one of my ex-coworkers, and she said that the company had to resort to selling video games and consoles to keep up with them losing money. I couldn't help but laugh. The biggest takeaway from this is that a manager can make a job horrible. You may love the job itself, but when management is a piece of junk, it just makes the job horrible. Your best course of action in that case is to look forward and never look back. OP, I hope you enjoy your new job. This next story comes to us from Jock McFarty. Bonus for a speedy job? Count me in. Let's jump right in. Not my malicious compliance, but I did witness the fallout. Some background. At the time, late 1970s, I was working for a Scottish bank as a junior operator of a pair of 370-158 mainframes leased from a big computer manufacturer that liked the color blue. These had been there a couple of years longer than me. One day, I came into work to find both of the comfy swivel chairs at the consoles had been replaced with 2 to 3 boxes of 2-part screen listing, green-lined computer paper with carbon paper between every sheet. Not very comfy at all. On querying WTF was going on, it transpired that there was a great disturbance in the force, or to be more specific, static electricity seemed to be the cause of intermittent hardware interrupts and unexpected IPLs, reboots of the mainframes. The workaround that seemed to work best was to use this large stack of insulation to protect the consoles from the people operating them. After a few days of investigation and data gathering, the vendor's engineer finally announced that he'd tracked down the root cause of their or our problems, fade to 3 years earlier. You see, when installing hugely expensive mainframes to an incredibly tight timescale, this vendor likes to make sure that deadlines are met no matter what, in order to comply with SLAs, service level agreements with the customer. So there had been a bonus on offer to the original engineer if he could complete the installation by date X. Well, wouldn't you know it, he was just about finished and right up against the clock when he realized that he needed a junction box to connect the consoles via underfloor cables to the PDU, power distribution unit, or electricity supply. A reliable industry-approved box could be sourced from the warehouse, but it would take until next day to arrive. What to do? So the temptation of that big fat bonus was just too much for him, and surely a junction box is a junction box, right? I'm not sure if he was being malicious or just greedy, but he nipped out to the nearest branch of rhymes with moolies, snapped one up for a couple of quid, and a few minutes later, job done. Technically, he'd complied with the requirements to win his bonus. Fallout, 3 years later, that moolie's junction box failed and nearly put a major bank out of business. You know, if this ever got back to the technician, I'm sure it would be grounds for dismissal. And don't be shocked that I'd make a pun like that, I just happen to have a spark of inspiration. This next story comes to us from Spoods McBeef. My boss demanded I serve all customers and fill all shelves, no matter how far past closing hours it was. Let's jump right in. So, my first job I ever worked at for a few years was a grocery retail store, with several different departments, including a deli for lunch meat and cheese, which is where I worked. One night, I was working 1 p.m. to 9 p.m. 9 p.m. is when the deli and other special departments closed, and we're expected to be done and clocked out. But the rest of the store remained open 24/7 for general groceries. It was me and one other guy. We had an especially busy night, and we were a little behind on our cleaning as a result. But we had our meat slicing machines already coated with sanitizer after working for 15 minutes to get all the little meat chunks and shavings out of every corner, as we were pretty serious about making sure those things were clean as can be. It's about 8:55 at this point, we're almost late to leave, and the store we worked for did not like overtime. If you were getting any amount of overtime, you would get chewed out the next day for it, even for a little amount. A woman walks up to the counter and starts looking through the product, as we had a glass case filled with a bunch of types of our lunch meats, pre-sliced and ready to go for bagging up. She looks at one and says, "I want this turkey right here, but I want it freshly sliced." I, of course, look to my coworker, and we both can see the 2 slicers we have are still covered in the sanitizer we use and are drying, as per the food safety protocol written on the bottle that says to allow 20 to 30 minutes minimum for the sanitizer to dry after application. I tell her, "Well, ma'am, we really can't do that right now. Our slicers are both being cleaned at the moment, as the department is closed in 5 minutes. But I'd be glad to get you something here from our cold case." "So you're not going to slice it fresh for me? That's what you're saying?" I replied, "That's correct, I apologize." Without another word, she walks away, and myself and my coworker go back to what we were doing. And we finish cleaning and go home after about 5 more minutes, narrowly clocking out on time. Fast forward 2 days later, me and the same coworker come in and start getting to work like a normal day. About 3 p.m., 2 hours into my shift, I personally get called into the head honcho's office. The store director, as they're titled. I think nothing of it and head on upstairs and go inside the office and sit down. The store director hands me a piece of paper and says, "Tell me what caused this." I look at the paper and it's a printed out screenshot of a Google review for our store. 1 star out of 5, and a full paragraph from that lady of 2 nights before complaining that she didn't get her freshly sliced meat from the rude employee and then described specifically me. I explained exactly what happened 2 nights prior, as clearly as I'm typing it out here. The director is getting heated and begins to cut me off while I'm speaking, asking, "Why would slicers be covered in sanitizer at 8:55? You're scheduled to work until 9 p.m. I said, "Yes, I am, but seeing as I'm constantly being reminded not to get any overtime, so I usually start cleaning them around 8:30. The director gets even more upset and raises her voice. "I don't care. That's not how it works. If you have a customer, you serve them. And you'd better start making sure those shelves are filled before you leave, or you won't be working here anymore. Now get out." I'm pretty salty at this point. I go back down to the department and my coworker asked what happened, and I told him. He says, "So they want everything done before we leave?" I said, "Yep," and without another word, he knew what we needed to do. 9 p.m. hits as usual, and our shelves are at the usual standard of half full. But seeing as we've been given a new standard, we decided to stay and make sure we did what I was instructed to do. We spent the next several hours past closing time slicing and slicing and slicing until every single tray of meat and cheese was full. We had plastic totes in the big fridge full of cheese that we sliced that were wrapped up in half-pound blocks for ease of sale. So we decided to fill that tub over the brim with every single type of cheese we had available. We cut up around 70 pounds of cheese and wrapped it up in the fridge. We also had a Subway-style sandwich counter where we made sandwiches to order and also pre-made on the shelves for sale. We made double the usual amount of sandwiches and filled the shelves, as per requested. Not a single shelf had a single empty spot on it by the time we were done. After every single possible item and shelf was as full as it could be, we finally started to clean and close. It was around 3 a.m. when we finally left. The department opens at 5 a.m. We were exhausted, but our spiteful overtime venture made us feel pretty good. We got about 6 hours overtime in. They hated anyone getting even 5 to 10 minutes of overtime. We both came in the next day at 1 p.m. as usual, expecting complete retaliation. But nope, instead, our department manager of the deli kindly saunters over to us and says, "Hey, you should be good to start cleaning up at 8:30 like usual. I think she, the director, got the point you made. Normally, overtime would be asked to be taken care of by clocking out for lunches or coming in later than usual, but they let us keep all 6 hours of that overtime. They never said anything to us about overtime again after that. I accepted a job that paid almost double about 6 months after this incident and never ever went back to retail hell." It sounds to me like the big boss in that store doesn't know how their own store runs. You'd think they'd have to have at least some kind of a grip on scheduling in the different departments. I know they have different department managers and whatnot, but in order to effectively run a place, you have to know how it works. I do love the fact that the boss gave them all those hours for overtime and didn't say a word about it. That was a respectable play. This next story comes to us from Jimothy Riggins. Take away my company car, I'll just fly everywhere. Let's jump right in. First, this isn't the company I work for, but a company that services the same customers, and I interact quite often with their sales team. For a little backstory, this job is a sales job, where you represent a manufacturer and travel around a territory calling on customers that sell your products. The territory is generally at least 2 states and averages 30,000 miles on the road per year, if not more. The company in question was recently acquired by a new ownership group that has a reputation for buying stagnant businesses, trimming down every possible expense they think is excessive, and selling it once it looks profitable, even though the company is barely functioning because of all the cuts. After the acquisition, the new ownership group decided that the sales reps' company cars were one of those excessive expenses. They were told to buy their own cars, and they'd be given a monthly allowance to pay for the vehicle. There's several problems. They drove at least 30,000 miles a year, so no matter what kind of car they bought, the car would depreciate in value very quickly, and they would likely need to trade it in a few years before it was paid off. Also, if they wanted to use exactly what their allowance would allow for a car, they'd likely be buying a 10 to 15-year-old beater, and it still wouldn't cover fuel and insurance. The sales reps were used to getting a new car every 2 to 3 years. It's important in this line of work to have a presentable car, because it's often used to take our customers around the market. For example, my company has a very strict policy about keeping the vehicles clean and will pay to repair any cracks in the windshield or dents in the car immediately, because we're a reflection of the company when meeting with our customers. It's just all around a situation where they're getting screwed over and would be spending their own money on something their old company used to cover, and it's essential to their job. Here's where the malicious compliance comes in. This new company didn't have a policy on flights. There was no rule on how far the destination needed to be before they were allowed to book a flight. Also, they were allowed to rent a car if they flew to a destination. Finally, their company card approval system didn't have very good checks and balances because of the acquisition. Basically, all expenses were sent to an understaffed department. Some were laid off during the acquisition, so they'd approve all expenses as long as a receipt was provided. So now the sales reps are buying ridiculously expensive, super regional flights and just renting a car at the airport. One of the reps I sometimes bump into had just flown from Kansas City, Missouri to Wichita, Kansas, which is 2.5 to 3 hours away on the interstate. He then rented a car and drove back to Kansas City to make sales calls for 2 weeks. He ended up back in Wichita, making sales calls the whole way, and flew back to Kansas City to start the weekend. He'd been doing this every week for months. So was the rest of their sales force. He told me that his average daily travel expense was $50 more than the monthly allowance they gave him to buy a car. Apparently, the new company just caught on towards the end of the year, and their year-end travel expenses for them are massive. Since the discovery, there's been multiple meetings, virtual town halls, and a ton of emails with new policies and procedures for taking flights and submitting expenses. The biggest win for them, though, is that at the beginning of this year, they all got company cars again. Ah yes, a professional and lawful revenge that ended up with actually teaching something to the people running the company. It amazes me how many stories we get where the bosses just don't seem to have any communication with the numbers people, and they make stupid decisions that put the company in a bad spot. This next story comes to us from Obese Fitness. I have called in sick at work for the past 3 years. Let's jump right in. Backstory: 4 years ago, corporate introduced a new system for calling in sick. Before, you simply texted or called anyone on your team, and they told everyone at the morning meeting. You now had to call a service, wait in line on the phone, and then speak to a nurse. This results in an automated email to your manager saying employee X is out sick and expected back in Y days. Conflict: the first time I got sick after this, I realized what a pain in the butt the phone call was. When I got back to work, nothing happened for a few days, but then the HR rep in my department came into my office and told me I also had to call in healthy. Okay, I called in healthy. I then called payroll as I didn't want to have an issue with the extra sick leave. Payroll told me that their system was not integrated with the call service for sick leave. They only used the regular timesheets. I now realized that this system was just to gather statistics and had no practical use. This kinda pissed me off, since the old system worked just as great for my team and was easier to deal with. Cue malicious compliance. The next time I got sick, I called in using the service. This time, I was sick for over 7 days, which meant that the system sent HR a reminder that I needed a doctor's note. I think this is what caused HR to come by the last time I was sick. I had a doctor's note when I got back to work, but I never called in healthy. The system didn't send out any more emails. This was in 2019. Last week, corporate gave a presentation on healthy work life, which basically went over sick leave statistics and showed their target goals of how low it should be. All of the goals were met in 2021, except for average number of sick days per employee. They also had a scatter plot graph over the distribution of sick leave. There was a big blob between 0 and 10, and some dots leading up to 30, and then nothing aside from one dot all the way out on the edge at 365. I did the math in my head, and if my 365 had been the actual number it was supposed to be, all metrics would have been met, and the VP that pushed for this BS would probably get a bigger bonus. I couldn't stop smiling. You'd think after seeing a number that was so much further out there than anybody else's numbers, that they would have looked in to see if that data point was accurate at all. But I guess that would require the people in upper management to actually have a grip on statistics, and we know how often that happens. This next story comes to us from Chaos Engine. How badly our vendors are screwing up directly relates to our departmental performance? Okay, sure, let's jump right in. I saw another post that jogged loose another instance of malicious compliance for my current job. No epic fallout, just a long trail of management showing they have no idea what they're doing. Background: starting 5 years ago, supply chain teams claimed to be tracking performance metrics to target areas for improvement. Translation: everyone is going to be asked to push out a bunch of new reports in addition to our regular duties to go to management, which they're going to do nothing with. One of the metrics my team's management chose to track for performance was the number of weekly back orders our vendors are hitting us with for the supplies that inevitably go into caring for patients. Now, to be clear, the performance being tracked is not the vendors. That would be silly. Instead, it's supposed to track whether or not the guy following up on back orders is doing his job chasing them, and can be used to terminate him if he's not resolving back orders fast enough. That's me, by the way. The original metric was to publish the stock status report I work off of to provide the entire department a snapshot of what's coming in, when, and how close to stocking out we are. So far, so good. However, for reference, at any one time, the average number of open items en route to us is between 400 to 600 products, of which 20% are usually backordered for some reason or another, so between 100 and 120 line items per week. However, completely out of thin air, management decided that it was apparently fair for the target to be set to an average of 10 backorders per week. Most likely, most of you have figured out the problem with this target. You can't track our performance based on the actions of our vendors. I literally cannot force suppliers to maintain supply on their items. And since we have a policy of not canceling backorders when they occur, because our ERP system doesn't have subs set up properly for 99% of the items in it, it would be impossible to prevent that number from routinely being over 10 on a weekly basis. It could maybe be done if we did cancel backorders and replace them with substitute products not on backorder, but that's not allowed. I pointed this out in a meeting with them, so they agreed that the report would be pared down to looking at items that were only going to stock out in the next 3 days, according to forecasting. They then asked if it would be possible to report less than 10 backorders when only looking at that 3-day window. I said sure, I can report 10 backorders or less each week based on that scope, but that wouldn't mean I'm not doing my job if it goes over. It just meant that our vendors were having a rougher time, and this is especially prevalent for periods like, the pandemic, where supply on anything is hard to come by and backorders are everywhere. None of which is the buyer's fault, so long as they're resolving those problems in a timely manner. I then suggested a different solution. Why not, instead, track the average number of items ending up in a defined number of days on hand, a low stock range, on a weekly basis, and use that as the metric for improvement, not number of backorders. This way they could ensure I'm chasing the backorders and resolving them in a timely manner. But also in the cases where we were carrying so little stock on hand that it was impossible to keep them out of the low stock status, that would be an indicator that we needed to be ordering and holding more on shelf. That way, the goal would be to reduce the report to 0 items, as stock levels were adjusted to account for delays. Then, if anything slipped onto the report, it meant the guy chasing backorders was at fault if they didn't get resolved before stocking out, because he had plenty of time to respond to the backorders. Did I mention management sets the shelf quantities, and they do it exclusively based on what they have in the budget, not how long it takes items to arrive or our usage rate? The blank stare I got from my boss when I pointed this out went to show that she had no idea what I was talking about. And I was just told to leave reporting to status quo, and they track number of backorders across a 3-day period. The compliance. So I did, and pumped out a report twice a week detailing what items are running out in the next 3 days. And for the next 6 months of this nonsense, we never went above the backorder target once. Because while we may have 30 items down to 3 days stock on hand, half of those will be because we literally carry less than 3 days on hand at any one time and haven't even generated an order yet, and they'll stock out before the vendor delivers them. Another 10 will be simply caused by the turnaround time for a vendor to process an order we placed, like yesterday, or shipping errors where something got screwed up, which causes things to stock out. And the last 5 are backorders that need resolved, or have already been resolved and we're just waiting for the solution to arrive to our doorstep. Fallout. My management thought this was going so well after 6 months, they decided to expand the scope of the report I produce to 5 days into the future, so everything on shelf stocking out in the next 5 days, without shifting the target to accommodate the new increased scope. They also didn't take into account the fact that the pandemic has massively impacted supply chains, meaning the report now starts at closer to 50 items at a time versus the 30 it was before, with 3 times as many backorders. So now, it takes roughly 2 hours per issue to siphon through and confirm exactly what's going on with each item and ensure 100% they'll arrive before stocking out. So to recap, my management are paying roughly $100 a week in wages to receive a personalized report they could print raw from the system in 30 seconds that tells them nothing they don't already know, and upon which they can't enact any performance improvements because they're tracking the one item on the report that is by and large outside of our control, while ignoring the ones that would be a quick in-system fix if they'd take 10 seconds to look at them. I pity our patients. I have absolutely no experience in the job you're doing. I don't know the first thing about it, honestly, but I completely understood what you were saying, and I don't understand how your manager couldn't figure it out. This next story comes to us from Mad Dan Eccles 1. Arrogant mechanic wants a job, he can have it. Let's jump right in. Years ago, my wife and I had a 13-year-old car with about 250,000 miles on the clock. It was mechanically sound and drove like a dream, but getting through the annual UK emissions test was getting increasingly difficult. Usually, it was just a case of running some injector cleaner through the engine and giving her a really good run before the test so that the engine was fully up to temperature, etc. But one year, the inspector attempted the test 3 times and failed her on high HC, unburnt fuel in the exhaust. I had a good look and found a crack in the exhaust manifold, which was sucking in air. So engine management was compensating by injecting extra fuel, and as a result, the catalytic converter was fried. Being that the car was sound in every other respect and I had no desire to replace it, I got my socket set out and started dismantling the exhaust system. All good until I found 3 of the exhaust header nuts were seized and no amount of heat, lubricant, and gentle persuasion was going to move them. I've been there before, and last time, I spent 2 days carefully drilling out the studs. So my wife took the car into a local garage to get them to take a look and quote us for the work. The mechanic, a cocky wee craphead who evidently thought he knew everything, checked it over and gave my wife a quote for a new cat, lambda sensor, manifold, and labor. But he failed to consider the possibility of seized header nuts, and we certainly weren't going to tell him. The quote had some added extras that my wife hadn't asked for, and came with an arrogant and condescending attitude, no doubt because a woman couldn't possibly understand how a car works. I know it's a lot of money, love, but that car needs a lot done to it, like hell it did. My darling beloved played the submissive wife part to perfection. Oh, I'm not sure, I'll have to ask my husband, etc, etc. So the mechanic knocked a few quid off to sweeten the deal. After work that night, we looked over the quote, noticed all the unnecessary extra work on it, but we figured that with the time it would take me to sort out those seized nuts, it was worth it. If he wanted the job for that price, he could have it. So the next day, my wife takes the car back, confirms that the quote is a fixed price for the job, and tells them to get on with it. It'll be ready this evening, love, the mechanic says, apparently happy with his deal. That afternoon, we get a call. We had some problems. It'll be a couple of extra days. A few days later, my wife goes back to pick up the car. The manager deals with it and informs my wife that there is an extra charge for the additional work required. My wife calmly slides the quote across the desk. Your mechanic gave me a fixed price for the job. Here's the quote signed by him. The manager is quite obviously seething, begrudgingly takes payment for the agreed amount, and hands over the keys together with a 12-month warranty for the parts that they used. She heard the manager screaming at the mechanic as she left. The next year, I presented the car for its annual test. It failed on the cheap catalytic converter they had used. Back to the garage with the car, and my wife asks them to replace the cat. That'll be 250 pounds, love, or however much it was. No, it won't, replied my wife, and slides the warranty with 2 weeks left on it across the desk. They fixed it for free, but the manager told her in no uncertain terms never to darken his doorstep with that car ever again. It's interesting that OP said that no amount of heat was going to remove those bolts, because there definitely is an amount of heat that would work. You know, the amount of heat that turns those bolts into liquid. One thing to keep in mind is that that new part will have a 12-month warranty on it as well. You probably won't get the labor paid out of it, because I think the labor would be applied to the original one way back when, but at least you'd get the free parts if something went wrong. This next story comes to us from Ten Shimki. Daisy chain power extenders to make power cables tidier at the risk of power trip? Sure, let's jump right in. I was involved in a pilot project and we had to do a proof of concept. We proceeded to set up several terminals in a room and connect each terminal to the nearest power outlet. I think we had over 10 terminals. When everything was done, it did look a bit messy, but we tried our best to make it look as nice as possible. When we were packing up for the day, a manager from another department decided to pay us a visit. He was furious about how untidy the whole setup was, and demanded we redo the power cables because they are not tucked all the way to the back where nobody can see them. He told me to use the power outlet at the rear as the main source of power and daisy chain power extenders to reach the terminals. I told him that by following this method, it is dangerous and will definitely trip the power. He told me off and said that's insubordination, and I'm setting a bad example for the rest of the team by not following orders from higher management. Cue malicious compliance. I told the whole team to follow the manager's instructions, despite the obvious dangers. After he checked that all cables were neat and tidy, he told us to go home and not do anything else since it might ruin the setup. Pretty funny statement coming from someone who has just ruined it. Day of the test came, and to nobody's surprise, the power tripped once we turned on all the terminals. I did not land myself in hot water, but had to explain to the stakeholders what happened, and was told to be more assertive in my argument from my manager. Rolled my eyes. Not sure what happened to that manager, but that was the last time anyone outside of my department tried to meddle with us. OP added a quick edit onto the end of the story. It says, edit. I had to listen to another department's manager because the project involves a few departments, and we were told by the organization to try and accommodate all the manager's requests. But nobody thought to insert the word reasonable into it. Yes, I could have run it past my manager to prevent this mess, but at that point in time, I'm sick of arguing and just want to go home ASAP. You know, I think your boss was actually right in the end that you should have been a little bit more assertive with telling them how much of a problem this could cause. Although I don't think I would have used power trip as my fighting words in that case, I probably would have used fire hazard or extreme safety hazard, something like that. This next story today comes to us from Jaya Papaya. Push me to keep drawing things for you? Be careful what you wish for. Let's jump right in. I just published the first episode of my webcomic, which reminded me of this event a few years ago. Context: I had just moved across the country to the west coast of the US and started high school at a hybrid homeschool. Think a college-like schedule, but with stay-at-home parents and a nursery to accommodate the babies they brought. I had been in Montessori, charter, private Catholic, magnet, and just regular old public school, so I stood out like a sore thumb to my classmates who had been homeschooled since, well, forever. The other girl in this story was one of those kids. Let's call her Betty. We had gotten along pretty well, we sat together in a few core classes, and both had an interest in creative writing. I was pretty decent at drawing at the time and still doodle pretty regularly. This caught her attention, and pretty soon we had a relationship of her stashing away the loose leaf drawings I didn't want, which was fine by me as it was mutual. But as most artists can tell you, sometimes people get a little too comfortable with requests and start to get pushy. Malicious compliance. Betty and I were both in the after-school theater program, and rehearsals took a long time, especially when you were a background character waiting for your cue. So I had my sketchbook and began drawing some old OCs, a married couple just interacting in general. Now, Betty really loved these characters. She thought they were adorable. At this point, I think she had about 30 different pages of drawings of characters from this series. So when she asked me to draw some more, I didn't mind and made a quick sketch of them hugging. She tilts her head at it, like she's content with it, but expected more. She hands it back to me and asks if I could make more. I was already on another set of characters from the series, so I told her I would once I finished this other doodle. The moment I put the pen down, she asks if I'm done and if I can make her more. I just accepted it as enthusiasm for my work, but it irked me a little that she couldn't wait a bit longer. So I make her another drawing, and she makes the same request for more. After about 3 more drawings, I finally had it. You want these two characters interacting so bad? I'll give it to you. A little thing about Betty was that she came from a very religious background, and many of her classmates at the homeschool did too. Certain topics were just not discussed in the open with a blasé attitude. I, however, hung out with the furry fangirls while at public school, which meant lots and lots of hentai etc. exposure. That combined with very literal and rational parents, sex was just a typical run-of-the-mill occurrence. We eat, we drink, we sleep, and we screw. And if you're married, you presumably screw your partner. I think you can all see where this is going. With a smile, I take the paper back, fold a small corner so she and myself could hide it easily, and proceed to draw the wife getting D'd the F down. Lots of detail in all the right places. Sweat drops and all the sound effects around them. Took about a minute. I handed it back to her and went, "Here, I hope you like this one." Her look of excitement quickly fades and she goes silent. I feel a little bad as I remember she's not used to explicit things like me, so I go back to drawing. We finish up rehearsals, go home, and that was it. Conclusion. The next day during class break, Betty comes up to me and sheepishly goes, "If you're not busy, would you be able to draw something for me, please?" I smiled and replied, "I'm not busy at all, and thank you for asking. What would you like?" Betty and I have been best friends for nearly 7 years. OOP, I think you might have opened their eyes up to something completely new, and now you might have a super fan. Is anybody else out there wondering exactly what it was she was asking for at the end? 'Cause I'd sure like to know. This next story comes to us from Pyro Stones. So you need a man's brain to do all of that? Okay, let's jump right in. First, context. Since I, male 28, was 11, my parents are divorced. My mother, female 64, got custody and we would see our father once a weekend every 2 weeks. I have also a little sister, female 25, so I ended up being the only man in the house. Growing up, our mother always taught us that we needed to participate in house duties, such as washing the dishes, taking out the laundry, preparing food, and during the week, us children would take care of all of that, because our mother would come back from work exhausted and expected to not have anything to do once at home. And we kind of were okay with that. Only that as young children, we would sometimes, often, forget to do stuff and it would cause a fight. But we ended up learning to not forget. Only there are some tasks that wouldn't be fairly distributed. My mother always needed a man close so that she could give him some work to do. And even though she never remarried and only dated 1 or 2 men after she divorced, she always found some male friend or some friend's husband or boyfriend to whom she could ask for help. Until at some point, people started to realize that she was being close to them for the only purpose that she could ask them for help. Yeah, she's one of those tit-for-tat people where if she does something for you, you have to give back something equivalent or you disappear from her life. So basically, she lost a few friends. But at some point, I was old enough to be useful, and she started asking me for help on these matters. "OP, the internet box doesn't work anymore. Can you look it up? It needs a man's brain to understand that." "OP, I just bought some furniture from IKEA. Can you build it for me? It needs a man's brain to understand that." "OP, can you carry luggage? Only a strong man can do that." "OP, can you look up why my computer is being slow? It needs a man's brain to understand that." And so on. I asked repeatedly that she looked at how I dealt with these things so that she could understand herself and fix it alone next time, especially when it was something so basic as to restart the internet box. But she didn't want to learn. She just wanted me to do it because she didn't want to have to deal with it herself. And it went on for a few years, growing from just restarting the box to piercing onto walls so that she could hang mirrors and stuff. For info, I never did anything of all that before she asked me to do it, so I guess it made me learn it, which is a good thing. But what bothered me was that she just didn't care and expected me to do all that because it was normal, and me knowing about it or not was not a question. I'm a man, so that's my job. And as I was growing up, and her still not learning anything, I got more and more frustrated. Until this one final time. I don't remember what specific task it was, where she told me that it was a man's job, needing a man's brain. I had a huge sigh, did the job, then went back to my business. Cue the malicious compliance. As some tasks require a man's brain, it's obvious that some others require a woman's touch, as we men are all about the technique, big thinking, and strength work. So the following days, I started to wash the dishes and put them back anywhere in the kitchen. Because you know, us men have no idea about where goes what in a house. We just fix things and carry heavy stuff. I forgot to get food back in the fridge because, you know, that's already cooked so it won't spoil. I overcooked my steak, eggs, pizza, because I was so busy thinking about all these techniques and stuff that I didn't have the brain space to think about checking food. Laundry would be spread to dry, one piece onto another, because it is more efficient as it saves space. And about cleaning the house, let's just say it was a waste of time, because I could perfectly live in my own mess. Of course, it didn't take long for my mother to get angry at me for not taking care of the house, or for doing it so stupidly. To which I answered, sorry. I mean, it takes a woman's brain to understand how to take care of a house correctly. Which, yes, is totally sexist. But so is saying that all the work she made us do was for men only. So at first she was dumbfounded, then the storm unleashed. It still is one of the biggest fights we had to this day. Things calmed down, and I went back to caring properly, until she asked for my man's brain again. From this point, I stopped caring. I would forget the laundry in the washing machine, let the dishes pile up in the sink, and would only do my man's job. She would still get really angry, ordering me to do stuff, which I would ultimately do, completely half-arsed, meaning that she had to do it all over after me, because half of the dishes were just out on the kitchen, not at their place. Laundry was all stuck together to dry, and so on. Mood in the house was tensed, and it wouldn't need much for a fight to blow up. Until at some point she asked me to help her do this or that, not to do it for her anymore. So I helped. I showed her how to do it. I took time for it. We did it together multiple times until she finally learned how to do it. I then started taking care of my duties as I did before, and things went back to normal. Finally. I think the biggest takeaway from this one is that if you want somebody else to do some work, you should at least be willing to help as well, or to even sit down and learn the processes yourself, because asking somebody else all the time doesn't make that person very happy. This next story comes to us from Derposaurus. You want me to speak to your insurance? Sure. Enjoy an at-fault claim on your policy. Let's jump right in. I work as an auto insurance adjuster for simple claims. For some background, one of the most complicated types of claims that I deal with are backing claims, like a person backing out of a space or similar. This is because backing claims have a potential for shared responsibility, depending on location of damage, statements, and so on. Typically for backing claims, it is crucial to take a very specific statement from both drivers to see the scene, even if virtually, and review the damage on both cars to determine liability. I received a claim. CV backed into IV. This means the claimant or other person backed into my person. Usually in most backing claims, there is a claim opened on both insurance companies, so they can each do their own investigation. Additionally, there's a process for billing the other company once liability has been determined. So insurance companies often speak during this process. It was day 5 for me, and I haven't been able to reach either my insured or the claimant after several texts, calls, and emails to both parties. My last call attempt for the day to the claimant, and I got an answer. I was immediately cut off before I could even finish introducing myself. She essentially stated that she will not speak to me at all, and that I will have to speak to her insurance. I asked if she had an open claim and a claim number to save me the trouble, and she stated, "I'm not in a place to provide you that at this time." I briefly mentioned just wanting to take her statement, and that her insurance would want me to do the same, but she doubled down and told me she will absolutely not speak to me before disconnecting the call. Okay, fine. I then found her insurance company, confirmed she hadn't opened a claim yet, then opened a claim on her behalf. I disclosed the information that I knew, location of damage on both cars, and the original facts of loss. Claimant backed into my insured. Her insurance agreed with me over the phone that it sounded like claimant was most likely at fault, but obviously they will do their investigation. Location of damage alone paints a very clear picture. Damage on the claimant rear bumper and damage to my insured's rear door is typically always 100% at fault on the backing party, because they owe the greater duty to yield right of way and maintain proper lookout. Fast forward an hour and I get a call from my insured. She told me she had been speaking with the claimant for several days and they were negotiating an out-of-pocket solution. Now, this is normal and some people do this, but if the claimant had just told me that in the first place, I wouldn't have had to file an at-fault claim on her insurance. If you know anything about insurance, The claimant's ultimate goal was to avoid her premiums from going up, but now she will have an at-fault claim on her policy that will certainly taint her records. Enjoy! Every time I hear a story about insurance claims, it just makes me think that people really need to jump on the bandwagon of having dash cams in their cars. And not just the ones that look forward, but the ones that look backwards as well. Or, in the case of a Tesla, one that looks out all four sides of the vehicle and records them at all times. Pretty epic, honestly. That dash cam in your car turns a he said, she said situation into a, well, I have footage, so let's go over this again, shall we? This next story comes to us from Ancient Educator 76. Charge me the right price. Aw, do I have to? Okay then, let's jump right in. Weirdos the name, fast food's the game. My second job taking orders has me listening to and meeting some interesting people. And in that order, this particular person I listened to sounded pretty cool in general. Then I met him a minute later to confirm, total forktard. Like if a Russian doll of cardboard boxes revealed nothing but a scentless fart, that would be how interested I'd be in whatever this guy has to say. Like if Professor Knitnot was an actual person. Anyway, Knitnot orders a grilled chicken sandwich and a junior chocolate frosty. Some background about our ordering process: if it's not too busy, I will actually be in front of the screen while the person's ordering. But 80% of the time, I'm remembering the order in my head while making drinks, chili, frosties for the previous order, which is why you often hear what I said to him. I'll have your total at the window. I continue taking the next order or two when the person I'm back to back with, the person collecting the money from the orders, says they gotta visit the bathroom, so I'm collecting now too. So I'm now running both sides, making the drinks from previous orders, and when I put in the order for the grilled chicken sandwich and a junior chocolate frosty, I hit the button that says Junior Chocolate Frosty Free with key tag button. So it shows up in the system but takes off the price because they get a free frosty with purchase. I decided that even if this guy didn't have the key tag for a free one, I'd still give it to him for free. Seemed pretty cool. The car I was talking to comes up and hands out a credit card as I say, "Hi, that'll be $6.37. With as much of a smile as I can muster whilst multitasking. The second I say the S sound in 7, the driver snatches the credit card back with enough force to hurt like a fork. If I didn't have such recently calloused hands, I'm positive it would have broken skin. Then they say, "There's no way my order was $6.37. I just had a chicken sandwich and a frosty. You better charge me the right amount." I go back in and double check the order. Yep, a grilled chicken sandwich is $5.89 plus tax. From where he basically sliced at the inside of my palm with his credit card, which served as a reminder to me that, oh yeah, he had a junior frosty too. I add a junior frosty to the total and delete the free with key tag frosty. I pop out the window like a jack in the box. Someone help me make this joke in the comments to first apologize and inform him of his new total. I made sure I said it like this: "Oh, you're right, I'm sorry, that wasn't the correct price. Wait, do you have a frosty key tag?" "No, I don't." "Okay, it's going to be $7.46 for the grilled chicken sandwich and the junior frosty. I mistakenly thought you had a key tag for a free one. My mistake." You know, because we need to apologize to the customer as a required part of our customer service contract. Blast. If someone could look dumbfounded and angry at the same time, this guy pulled it off. Like a dog when they hear a fart for the first time, the very second they decide to bark at it, kind of like that. The funniest part was, as I was handing out the bag, his card, and his wife, sitting in the passenger seat, saying as they drove off, "Way to go, butthole, I could've got a free frosty," emphasizing the word with a smile on her face. Made the guy laugh also, lucky bastard. I have to admit, at some fast food places, I kinda wonder about the pricing when I get up to the window. 2 burgers and 2 fries and 2 drinks comes to $32? What the hell, A&W? Anyway, I think if I'd got to the window and realized that the price was a little bit lower than it should be, I think I'd do the honest thing and let them know. This next story comes to us from Present Shame. Cheese. Let's jump right in. When I was in college, I worked at a burger joint that most West Coasters know and love. The menu was pretty straightforward, and all the combos were only there for convenience, as the prices were the same if you ordered each item individually. As such, there were only 3 combos. Number 1, double combo. Number 2, cheeseburger combo. And number 3, hamburger combo. For reasons I will never understand, people would order a number 2 with no cheese, or a number 3 with cheese more often than one would imagine. In most of these instances, I found it easier to just ring up the order as it should be, but read it back to them in the way they ordered it. Example, if they ordered a number 2 with no cheese, I would just enter in a number 3, but read it back as a number 2 with no cheese. The price for the slice of cheese at the time, I think, was only 60 cents. But everything needed to be entered into the system correctly, since each meat patty and slice of cheese was counted at the end of and before each day, to make sure sales were being properly tracked. Enter some snobby kid, maybe 15 or 16, and the waste of space that must have been his dad. Dad puts his order in and steps back to let his kid order. Kid is texting while I'm taking his order, which already annoyed me, but the tone in which he spoke just made me want to punch him in the throat. He orders a number 2 with no cheese. Given how this interaction already started out so wonderful, I decided to give a little pushback because why not? Oh, you mean a number 3? No, I just want the number 2, but I don't want cheese on it. That's a number 3. I said number 2, no cheese. Dad says, maybe stop arguing with customers and just ring it up. He didn't yell, but again, his tone of voice was just so darn disrespectful and annoying. During this conversation, the dad is just standing behind him with a crap-eating grin on his face, like he is so proud his kid turned out to be such a dick. So I ring it up as a number 2, read their order back to them, and send them on their way. I walked back to the grill where the order ticket prints out and wrote no cheese on it and told the cook the same thing. Since everything is tracked, a piece of cheese was entered into the system for that number 2, and they already paid for it. I went into the walk-in and ate a slice of cheese so as to not throw off the inventory. Best darn piece of cheese I ever had. Ah yes, let me argue with the person who knows what they're doing and end up paying more for it in the end too. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. But this really wasn't a case of malicious compliance. This was more like a case of delicious compliance. Right, OP? This next story comes to us from J-Man U Waterloo. I do not need you staying here with me answering phone calls or processing customers for the rest of the shift. Let's jump right in. Context. I used to work at a major supermarket in the online grocery department. This happened when I was about 7 months in this position, and about this time, the Delta variant of COVID had arrived, which meant that everyone in the community was scared of getting COVID and didn't want to actually walk into the grocery store to shop. Thus, all of these folks placed online orders for either pickup or delivery. Due to this exceptional demand, our bosses decided to have 20 order slots available to customers per hour for pickup. I worked in the pickup team, and the delivery team was outsourced to a third-party company. Anyways, we have a couple of new colleagues join us, and one of them in particular is of a very young age, 3-ish years younger, who also happens to be a micromanager and essentially a pain in the butt to work with. We'll call him Andy. Andy loves to go on his phone all the time. Mind you, I'm only in post-secondary now, and this happened in early 2021. In our team, we have a couple of roles which are assigned to staff on a daily basis. Sometimes the roles change, but generally they stay the same. Per our specific store policy, there are supposed to be 2 persons in the home area of the team at all times, answering customer calls and gathering all the necessary bins for a person's order. Note that role is given to generally more tenured persons unless they request otherwise, and requires additional training from the department manager. One person is responsible for taking out the groceries to the customer's vehicle, and the rest of the staff are usually assigned to collect the individual items off the store shelves per a customer's order. Story. One day, I come into work and I'm working a full shift, 8 hours. It happens that I'm working with newer staff only, and Andy is also working. There's no role assignment sheet out on that day, so no specific roles were assigned. I decide, since I'm the more tenured and have had the necessary training, that I would stay in the home area of the team. Andy comes up to me and says that the manager had assigned him to stay for his shift, and he requested for me to help collect items off the shelves for the rest of my shift. Note here, it's difficult to be using your phone while collecting customer items, so ideally you want to stay in home base to use your phone. You haven't had training from manager yet, and I am more tenured. No, I have the training. Please go and collect items. I do not need you staying here with me answering phone calls or processing customers for the rest of the shift. Are you sure? All of the order slots are full for the rest of the shift. Yes, it's fine. Please go and collect items. Okay. Malicious compliance. So I go and start collecting items for future customers' orders and return to base after a run, hour 1, to drop off the containers with items and grab new containers. You can only take so many containers in a cart at once. Andy seems to be managing fine, so I don't disturb him and go out for a second run. I come back, hour 2, and Andy asks me to take over his customer phone call. At this point, the customer is arguing over something trivial, but I tell him, "You told me you don't need me to stay here for the entire shift, so I'm going for another run." Andy hesitantly agrees, and I continue with my third run. I come back, hour 3, and there's a queue of about 7 post-it notes with customer orders on it, and Andy is on the phone with the customer. Anticipated customer wait time of 35 minutes? Yikes. Post-it notes were used when we didn't have time to print off proper order summaries. Additionally, the policy for waiting times is a maximum of 5 minutes from the time they call. He sees me and asks me to help him process orders as well as obtaining the required container so the staff responsible for taking orders out could do so in a timely manner. Once again, I tell him, "You told me not to stay here and do any of the home base's tasks. I'm going for another run." I come back, hour 4, and there is a long line of 23 post-it notes with customer orders on them. Anticipated customer wait time of 2 hours. Big yikes. And this time, he pulls on my arm as soon as I come in and asks me to help him answer phone calls and process orders. But once again, I refused, referencing what he told me. He let out a massive sigh and called the manager's extension. At this point, I went out to do another run. Halfway, hour 4.5 through my run, I'm interrupted by the manager on duty. Our team's manager had gone home for the evening. He asks me to come with him to help him and Andy in our area to clean up the backlog, as at this point customers were waiting well over 3.5 hours. Major problem. I walk back into the home base and the manager questions me of why I wasn't staying in the home base, taking care of phone calls and customer orders. I tell him the full truth. Specifically that Andy had strictly noted that our team manager assigned him and only him to be in the home base managing these tasks, and Andy had sent me out to collect customer items for the rest of the shift in its entirety. Andy rebutted with the fact that he did not say this, and that he asked me to help him multiple times and I had blatantly refused. I told both the manager and Andy that I'll be helping to clear the backlog and then going back to doing runs, and at this point I empathize with our customers waiting for 3.5 hours. At the end of my shift, we finally managed to catch up a decent amount, and I did end up staying about 30 minutes overtime to reschedule the customers scheduled for later in the day to the next day's morning slots, double booking the next day's slots. Well, Andy went home already. As a courtesy, I gave each customer that had to be rescheduled a $20 voucher. There were 44 total rescheduled customers. Just as I clocked out, I bump into the manager and he tells and rants to me what a crap show today was. I tell him, "You may want to look at the CCTV of our home base. Have a good rest of your night." Fallout. It so happened that I was taking 2 weeks of leave that day, and after the leave, when I went back, I noticed every shift that Andy was doing runs and never staying in the home base. Turns out, the manager on duty looked at the CCTV that very same night and heard very clearly what Andy had told me. Conferring with our team manager, they canceled his administrator permissions on the order processing computer, which he had begged our team manager for over 2 weeks, as well as giving him a written warning. However, that didn't seem enough, since while I was away, Andy decided to do the same thing to another staff member, and ended up getting a second and essentially final written warning. Plus, he made it on the frequent monitoring list of every manager. At 3 written warnings, your employment is immediately terminated. The days and shifts that followed after were very pleasant, and there was not a single peep from Andy when he came into work. He directly started collecting customer items without asking. Now, OP added on a little bit of an edit to this one that gives you a little bit of extra information to follow up the story. It says, update after I called my friend who still works there. 1. Andy still works there, still has his admin privileges revoked, and is solely collecting the customer items, printed with the assignment sheet, not anticipated to change. Generally, role assignments are written in on the day of. 2. Former team manager was laid off as of January 2022 for mistreating the department, including scheduling staff outside of their availability slots, as well as multiple incidences of not following policy. 3. Our team's voucher budget increased 50% for this calendar year because of worse incidents that happened after I left the company. OP says they gave out about $1,480 worth of vouchers that day. That's enough money to make somebody think twice about who's running that department and what exactly is going on there. What really makes me wonder though is that they tripled the amount that they were allotted to give out, so I guess they were thinking that there was going to be a lot more problems in that area. Time for some new management, that is for sure. This next story comes to us from El Ragu. No, I am the master of baiting. Let's jump right in. Hey guys, enough time has passed that I think I can safely post this story here. It's a tale of revenge, a petty grudge, and giving the doctor exactly what he requested from Mr. Tato's IT department, who is me. Okay, so a while ago the resident doctor at Mr. Tato's Tato plant resigned to go for greener pastures, which is a shame because he was the nicest guy. A couple of weeks later, Mr. Tato's medical wing sent us a replacement doctor, and I almost instantly didn't like the guy, who we will call Dr. Mikos. I like to think I have a pretty sharp intuition, but I don't really let it drive my behavior in front of people I just met. But holy crap, did he ever work to deserve it? During the course of his first couple of months at the plant, Dr. Mikos lost the documentation for my contractors several times, then denied them entry because they had no documentation. This caused several vital repairs to our network infrastructure to go behind schedule, and Francis, the plant director, to get on my butt about it. Was specially demanding of my time, most of the time for petty things I can't control or address. Didn't even get a ticket or anything. He would just call me over to look at his computer, demanding I fix it. Not his work computer, his personal computer. Also, somehow made enemies of most of the departments. This will come into play later. Then the incident. Due to electrical equipment failure, for quite some time all the networking infrastructure had to be powered with a diesel engine. I don't really want to go into the specifics cause it will fill this story with clutter, but either gas goes in or the plant stops, and Mr. Tato loses a buttload of money. So my contractors came in to fill the critically empty engine. At this time, we were about an hour away from a dry engine and doom. Francis, the plant director, personally approves and escalates the entrance of my people as an emergency. Then, Dr. Mikos stops the whole thing, citing a health risk. My people can't work, and the power plot will stop. Eventually, me, Francis, and the maintenance department got around it by asking maintenance to pump the gas themselves. But this move earned him the ire of Francis, and got the doc into my crap list. But that wasn't the thing that earned him my grudge. One day, Priscilla asks for my help. She's the head of her own department, a very nice older lady who knows not a darn thing about computers and is constantly asking me for help. Because she warrants about half of my support tickets a year, you can say she's my primary source of income. Well, I'm working on her email cause it won't load. Then, Dr. Mikos comes in asking for whatever. And let me tell you, he was not just rude, he was dismissive, called her worthless. When I ask her about it after the guy left, she tells me he's like this every time. This is the moment that gave me casus belli. I started collecting information, discovered some very interesting tidbits, and waited for my time. This will come into play later. One day, Dr. Mikos calls me into his office. He demands that I give him access to the open net, because at the moment he can't browse freely. This was my time. Well, I can't really do that. You have to create a support ticket and a request. This could take a week or a month. technically true, it took a couple of days most of the time. It will also have a cost for your area. This was also true. It would cost about $1 a month. He stood there for a couple of seconds thinking, but you have internet access on your desk. You can browse anything, right? Give me access. And there it was. I can do that, but you have to keep it confidential, because it's outside the corporate network. There's no surveillance. Do it. And I did. Usually, in a corporate setting, employees have access to the heavily monitored and restricted corporate network. Mr. Tato's network has a team of people that block all the fun stuff and watch your every move. The network he asked me to route to his office is basically what you would find in a home. I mostly use it for things that need access to an outside network, and it only has my eyes on it. Yes, this was a trap. The moment I finished routing the cable to the doc's office, I set up a small backup laptop with surveillance software and started the capture. Called the doctor, told him his private internet is installed, and I reiterated how he should consider this an olive branch and he should tell nobody about it. Now, a couple of very interesting tidbits of information. Surveillance software is so cool. Basically, it sees and logs traffic on your network. You see what every computer or device is doing on your network, what sites you are browsing, and at what times. During the course of my investigation, I learned that Dr. Mikos was a serious creep. He earned infamy with his female staff with lewd and uncomfortable comments. Several female workers also complained, but due to the way HR works, Pete, the head of HR, couldn't do anything about it without hard evidence. But I knew what the capture would find, and the doc delivered fast. After a whole day of data capture, I showed the logs to Pete, and I was honestly almost impressed. Several different adult sites at 10 a.m., traffic to this various sites for about an hour. We asked the staff at the medical office, and at this time, he was shut into his office. Another visit, different site this time, at 1 p.m. lunchtime. Guess he was having a cheeseburger. And a third one at 5 p.m., 1 hour away from closing time. Dude watched adult material at work on his computer 3 times in one day. It was kinda hard to explain to Pete how data capture works, but that was it, hard evidence. I apologized to Pete for giving him extra work, but he dismissed it, said he was happy to have cause, called the head of medical nationwide immediately. Dr. Mikos was escorted out by security the next day, and I showered his work laptop in alcohol before starting work on it the next day, and my days improved. Also, the title of the story probably makes sense now. I really want to know, who thinks that they're not going to be tracked at all when they specifically ask for untracked access to the external internet? What? Also, if this guy was doing this 3 times in a day at work, could you imagine what his house looks like? Frosted donuts come to mind for some reason, and I'll just leave you with that image in your head. You're welcome. This next story comes to us from Tiger Dragon 180. You can't quit on a Friday. Let's jump right in. This was from my last job, global financial firm with initials MS. I was a contractor in the IT department there for over a year. Had a lot of complaints against them. Original manager forgot to file paperwork, costing me a free position, overworked, culture that tried to sell more work as being a sign of praise rather than pay you to do more work, etc. Well, it was time for me to move on. I'd scored a great state job, better pay, great benefits, still work from home, and even then, the office was even closer. All around, they wouldn't be able to compete. They were aware of this for about 2 months as they almost sank it by dragging their heels on some verifications, like employment verification. I even flat out told my manager I'd be leaving at the end of the month. Finally, had my official start date. Gave a bit over 2 weeks notice to quit on a Friday, so I could start my first day on Monday. Here is where the stupidity begins. This place has a policy to run all software updates on Sunday, so every Monday is hell. Everything is broken due to poor QA, all hands on deck. If you call off, they are going to fight you, etc. They like to bully people, and everyone who left had some attempt to get them to stay longer, and it has sadly worked. People don't get how little power they actually have. So my time came. Manager calls me up, goes on and on with BS, tells me it's not proper etiquette to give only 2 weeks notice, since when? that I should know it takes a minimum of 3 weeks to complete training, so I should know they can't replace me in time. You had 1 to 2 months already. And how can I do this to my coworkers? I'm selfish and a bad person. So this doesn't get the reaction or response management wants. Now they bring out policy. They tell me it's against company policy to quit on a Friday. I know this is BS, but they don't really hand out policy books here, and HR is kinda, well, for contractors it's not a thing. Contractors are second-class workers with hardly any rights after all. Still, I'm leaving the company. How does this affect me? I tell them something to the effect that I'm the one quitting. I'm still going to leave on that Friday. Seriously, not sure how this was going in their mind. They doubled down that I had to work that next Monday for them. I think hoping to get their foot in the door, ruin my next job, etc. Well, this isn't working for them now, is it? They are really fuming now. So they give their ultimatum. If I won't work that Monday, then I am to sign out and not clock back in until I have changed my mind. They are looking smug. They are effectively threatening to fire me early, making me lose out on money and stuff. They know we don't have PTO. Well, I also have no care at this point. My finances are fine. My new job I need a full suit for. I guess I earned myself an unpaid vacation. I log out. They keep looking smug and leave me with another, remember, don't clock in until you've decided to be reasonable. The next day, I don't log in. A few hours later, I get a call screaming about how I'm late and I've caused so many problems. I cut them off saying I'm still not coming in Monday, so per our meeting, I'm not to clock in. Silence. They ask if I'm serious. I ask if they were serious yesterday. They call me a pug-headed fool and tell me to just come in on Monday like they asked. Thought this was a demand. Then they wait a moment and ask if I'm going to grow up and come back in. Well, I'm bored at this point and ask if they're going to pay me my new rate on Monday. I get a confused no, and I tell them they have their answer. They called every day that last week, bouncing between apologies, insults, browbeating, etc., while still always standing on the "you need to come in on Monday." This was a whole week of them, sometimes multiple days, begging me to come in, even part of the day, to dig them out of holes. But then doubling down that, if you come in, that does mean that you're coming back all the way through Monday, right? I'd already dropped off their equipment since I didn't need any of it at this point, even if I did finish my week. They even called on Monday to tell me I was fired for not showing up. I still think they thought I was joking or playing hardball for a promo or raise. It's the only reason I have for all that, or they really thought I'd throw my new job for them. They had a big focus on company loyalty that a lot of people seem to buy into, so maybe they just assumed I'd be loyal. I did hear my old manager had to fill in for me as they couldn't get anyone to do my shift and my jobs. And that now, months later, my manager and several others quit as everything is buckling. They promised more than they could deliver and drove off experienced employees like me. I saw this one in the comment section and I just had to mention it. It says, "You need to come in Monday." No, my last day is Friday. "You better be here on Monday." No, I finish on Thursday. "Please, please, please, we need you here on Monday." No, Wednesday is my final day. "F you, your butt better be here on the dot Monday." Nope, today was my last day. I absolutely love the statement of, it's against company policy to quit on a Friday. Okay, I'm leaving. You can't dictate what day I quit on. Have a nice day. Bye-bye now. This next story comes to us from MBXZ7LWB, Programmer Revenge Story. Let's jump right in. I was hired as a temp for this big food distribution company, which will remain nameless for anonymity's sake. The woman's position I was filling in for was going on maternity leave soon. I really needed the job at the time, so I took it, and they promised if I did an amazing job, they'd hire me full-time. I was a raw materials supply distributor. Basically, I ordered supplies and sent them where they needed to go for scientists to make new foods. I have a really strong background in computer programming. After learning how to do the job in a month or so, she had her baby and went on leave. I completely automated this woman's job in a matter of weeks, using only Excel and PowerShell. I didn't say a word until the end of my last few weeks, where I basically did very little in the time leading up to her return. I added in a few updates for changes in workflows, and verified all the data was correct at the end of the day after it ran, but that was all I really did. I asked for more work from my boss, which led me to fill in on the production line, a path I did not want to take. Towards the last few weeks of my temp period, the woman returned from maternity leave. I showed her what I had done. Her jaw had about hit the floor in awe that I had made all the hard work she was doing for years be completed by a computer program in a few minutes every day. In our next team meeting, it was brought up that I would need to get everyone online with this program before my temp period was up. Ding, ding, ding went off in my head that they are not planning on keeping me with that idiotic comment, so I obliged and got everyone on board. Unbeknownst to them, I put in a clause in the PowerShell script with a ClicksML encryption locally to the PC I was using. It grabs a specific encrypted date a few weeks out from my termination date and would just stop working after that date, or once they had wiped my local folder on the PC, or just simply not having the PC on. If they had decided to keep me, I could just turn it off and no one would have been the wiser. I added this snippet to every if statement and for loop possible with a new variable every time, thanks PowerShell, in the code, so that if someone was to go through it to try and fix it, it would be a nightmare to fix if they had the audacity to, with identifying and renaming every variable and clause and regenerating the ClicksML. So, as you can imagine, I was not offered a full-time position for said company, and when I had mentioned the comments when I first started for doing an amazing job, which I believe I had fit the criteria for doing so, my boss said that with SAP coming into the production team next week, my expertise would not be needed. A month or so later, I got a text from my old boss saying that he needed to talk to me about that program I wrote. It was 2 days after my magic shutoff date. I knew exactly what the call was about and never returned the call, as I had a better job offer already lined up. I feel if I had returned the call, I wouldn't be able to stop laughing during the conversation of troubleshooting. OP, I feel like a golden opportunity has been missed, and we see this so often in stories like this. When the company calls you back and says, hey, we have a problem with this code that you wrote, you mention to them, well, there was nothing in my work contract about ownership of code, so if you want me to come in and fix that, here's my consulting rates. They're about 3 times higher than what you were paying me before. I hope to hear back from you soon. This next story comes to us from 57. You must give 2 weeks notice. Let's jump right in. I'm an IT guy and many years ago took up a job for a smallish company as their one-stop shop. It was basically the first job I talked to, and I took it because it was right down the street and allowed remote work. The pay was nothing to write home about, but I essentially had no boss and made my own hours, so it was worth it. Well, right up the front, they started making weird demands. We want someone who's going to commit to working with us for a long time, say 5 years. Also, if you quit, we want 2 weeks notice. They must have been burned because they kept repeating these things verbally, not written anywhere, so I didn't put a ton of stock in them, but I did agree. Time goes on and it's the same old story. Raises are essentially non-existent. I'm generally pretty adept at anything I try my hand at, technologically speaking, so I start getting pulled into additional areas of responsibility without any additional pay. My workload goes up. Inflation keeps rising, but each year my raises are pushed off until next year when we make more profit. Even though I was able to demonstrate with hard figures that I was saving the company significant money and significantly reduced downtime, it wasn't rewarded appropriately. Meanwhile, I watched the owners go off to various beaches for 2-week vacations. Well, 6 weeks out from my 5-year anniversary, I get poached by another company with a significant pay bump and less responsibility. I thought about giving them the advance notice, but ultimately what made me stick to their policy of 5 years with 2 weeks notice was some disrespectful conversations the owner had with me. I don't need to go into detail, but essentially, rather than professionally disagreeing over how some things were handled, he outright disrespected me. Additionally, I watched multiple 15 and 20-year career employees terminated with 0 notice. The notice courtesy didn't extend both ways. Okay, fine. Then you can have your 5 years and 2 weeks notice. I waited 4 weeks after accepting my position with the new company before I told them. I gave my notice and they start scrambling. In that company, it takes 2 weeks to make a simple decision, let alone hire a competent replacement for something important like an IT guy. They opt to go with a managed service provider, a company that provides IT services rather than a single person like they had for decades. Given my experience with the owner and his personality, I knew this would not go well. I had prepared boatloads of documentation for all the systems and tried to turn it over to the MSP. They didn't want it, claimed it would be unreliable and their systems could gather all the information they needed. I was there for 3 days while the MSP was gathering information, and they barely spoke to me. Okay, good luck, I said, as I gathered up all my documentation and took it with me on my last day. The owner grabs me on the way out. What would it take to get you to stay? How much do you want? Just name your price. Nope, I learned my lesson. If they don't pay you raises without the threat of leaving, then they don't value you, and they'll just use you as a stopgap while they find and train someone cheaper. The week after I quit, I start getting calls. They tried to replace hardware and it failed, and nobody knows how to get into anything. They have to revert it back and there's a bunch of downtime and the MSP is doing a poor job. This continues for a few months. Hey, can you just jump on this call with us real quick so we can figure out what's causing this outage? Can you sit in on this vendor call and give us advance on replacement products? Can you do X and Y thing that the MSP cannot or will not do? Nope, I don't work there anymore. Sorry. The company goes so far as to send me a check in the mail out of the blue for IT services. I don't cash it. Eventually, they hire another single IT person to be on site full-time and do things their way. But at this point, he's lost critical continuity because he's only getting whatever turnover the MSP can provide, which is minimal. That also goes about as well as you'd expect given his lack of documentation and turnover. Lessons learned for the company. 1. If your people are doing a good job and you don't want to lose them, then show them that. Through pay or benefits, show them that. 2. You may not want to place strange constraints on length of employment or try to mandate the notice that employees give. Notice is a courtesy, not a right, especially if you don't reciprocate. 3. Other employees notice the way you treat your long-standing loyal employees. 4. Be respectful. There's no reason to disrespect each other in a professional environment especially. 5. Be sure to get all the documentation and turnover that you can. That is definitely a trap that you want to watch out for. You find a better job with better pay, the current employer offers you the same pay or better, and you take it. Then, the company replaces you with someone that you train to do your job, but for less pay. That is a bunch of bullcrap. This next story comes to us from The Real Federal. Does your priority take precedence over his priority? Let's jump right in. I was working as the technical writer for a software company that had contracts across a number of business types, everything from government utilities to military simulation. As such, I ended up tasked by several teams in the company, each one needing my immediate attention in generating user guides and documentation for their projects. My bosses only had 2, Bob and Bob, also needed me to assist them in writing proposals for various contracts that they were bidding on. This led to me constantly being pulled in multiple directions at once, as everyone needed me to finish their project yesterday. I was working until late in the night sometimes to finish vital projects that they just had to have. The final straw came when, after listening to one of the programming teams bee me out for failing to update the user's guide for a software update that they had only finished the day before, and one of my bosses called me into his office to chew me out for failing to complete his proposal that he kept making changes to at 11 p.m. the night it was due to be submitted. Oh, and our office manager had left for maternity leave. So our penny-pinching bosses figured I could do her tasks like answering phones, buying office supplies, and entering time cards in my copious spare time. When he told me sternly that I would need to learn to manage my work time better, I finally snapped. Malicious compliance powers activate. I came in on a Sunday and posted up a huge magnetic whiteboard behind my desk that was visible as you walked into my office. I made colored magnetic labels with each project I was currently doing, who had assigned the task, and the due date of each. I also put a column of numbers, 1 through 20, along the side. I then placed each task in order of due date. I came in early that morning and as usual, each team lead came into my office to ask the status of their tasking of me. I pointed behind me at my board and said, I am currently working on task 1 and 2. If you think your task takes priority, I'm going to need written permission from the people above you to move your task above theirs. There were a lot of unhappy people that morning. Eventually, the bosses sauntered in and came into my office after listening to all the teams being to them about me ignoring their projects. They both came in my office, and before they had said anything, I pointed behind me. All I said was, I am currently juggling 18 projects and the job of the full-time office manager. I can only work on so many things simultaneously. If you think that any of my projects are out of priority order, let me know, otherwise leave me alone. The two of them stared at the board for about 5 minutes before leaving. About an hour later, they came in and said they didn't realize the amount of work each of the teams was throwing on my plate because each team thought I had plenty of spare time. I wish I could say that I got a raise or an attaboy, but by then, end of the day, 6 items were pulled from my board and given back to the programming teams. Oh, and my bosses hired a temp to take care of the phones and time cards until our office manager returned. Sorry it wasn't a people got fired or the company folded a year later kind of story, but I thought it belonged here. You know, there's something completely satisfying about telling your boss to shut the hell up and doing it professionally without anybody complaining. Very well done. This next story comes to us from NT Engineer. Demand for training time leads to no work getting done. Let's jump right in. So this happened to me a bunch of years ago. I read a story similar to this a bit ago and it triggered a memory. I thought it was funny and I thought I would post it here. I was working at a company who was always big on development, training for this, that, and the other things, thinking of new ideas, etc. At one point, they came out with a new policy. They wanted all people to do at least 8 hours of this development a week, and in turn, our work product hours would be shortened to be 32 hours a week. They felt this would benefit the company long term. In reality, our CEO had read about Google doing this and thought it was cool. The problem was, all the project managers had due dates for their projects that didn't include me sitting at my desk thinking for 8 hours. They expected me to get my stuff done, and I was already working more than 8 hours a day on average, and I wasn't going to work more. So I ignored the new policy and kept doing my work. A quarter later, my manager comes to me with a report. He said he was sorry to do this. He thought the new policy was BS too. But the report showed that I had logged no time to development in the last quarter. So I was being advised by him that I needed at least 8 hours every week in development or I would get in serious trouble next quarter. Cue malicious compliance. So every week after that, for 4 hours over my 2 busiest days for meetings, so it pretty much filled the days, I sat at my desk and read technical guides, watched computer-based training, or just thought about things. Often, I would go into the data center and hide in a corner and think about things for 4 hours, and then go back to my desk. Then I would mark the time as development and go home, usually because it was the end of the day. I was covered for this because the policy said it was okay to do your development away from your desk so that people didn't bug you. They even suggested the lunchroom, bad place, or outside when the weather was good. It was really goofy. While I was thinking, my phone would go off like crazy with people looking for me. I'd get texts that there was some emergency that I needed to deal with, but I just ignore them. After all, it was made clear to me that development time was mandatory, and I'm thinking. After 2 weeks of this, not very long indeed, my manager has a meeting with me and a project manager. When will these tasks be done? I tell them end of next week. But you said end of this week. Yes, but I've been required to take 16 hours of development time over the last 2 weeks. Plus the 8 I take next week is 24 hours. Plus all the meetings I have to do. So it extended the schedule by 40 hours approximately. The PM was not happy, but he couldn't say anything. So lo and behold, some of my coworkers saw what I was doing. They had been putting in the 8 hours to the tracking system, but either not doing it or doing it on their own time. But they started following my malicious compliance. You can see where this heads. Pretty soon, all projects are behind. Quarterly internal report comes out and hooray! 100% participation in the development directive. Oh, and 0% of our projects were delivered to our customers on time. So now we have customers really pissed off. PMs pissed off, managers pissed off, VPs pissed off, etc. All because quite a bit of us worker bees decided to do the development directive and think for 8 hours a week as was asked. It was not long after that an email came out. They were happy with the results of the last 2 quarters of the development initiative, and they had decided to now analyze the data and determine if it was a good fit for the company. Thank you for participating, everyone, but please get back to the way we used to do business. That's how myself and a bunch of my coworkers got rid of our development initiative. Just a footnote, none of us thought the concept was bad. We thought having development time was good as long as we could do things like study for certs or learn new tech or whatever. But there was so many restrictions on what you could and couldn't do, like it had to be on site during business hours, not like after hour classes and such, that it just became a joke and we wanted it gone. Well, OP, your coworkers seem to me to be a bunch of morons who puts in all that extra time on their own free time. I mean, come on. This is a company mandate. It's something you do on company time. They're paying you for it. Come on. This next story comes to us from Deshandi. New dress code for the IT department of 1 person. Let's jump right in. Not my story, written for dramatic effect, but not exaggerated or fabricated. The backstory. Father-in-law works for a heavy equipment manufacturer. Highway making equipment, machines for gold and gem mining, etc. These machines aren't really relevant to the story, only that they're big and scary enough that everyone is very strict about safety. Well, almost everyone. This company has one IT guy. He does everything from web admin to the ID badges to the printer isn't working, so obviously he needs an office with a computer. Only problem is, most of his job is keeping the ancient assembly line machines on life support, so he's constantly on the factory floor fixing error code TI-86 on machine C137, etc. The problem. One day, one of the VPs of butt kissing deigns to leave the plush veneer of the C-level suites to enter the plebeian office, and takes great offense to the IT guy wearing jeans, boots, and a high-vis vest in their strictly suit and tie office. Protests about his job duties fall on deaf ears, and since the IT department of 1 person doesn't have an official C-level office, VP of butt kissing decides to write a new dress code for the IT department. Suit and tie at all times. No exceptions. IT guy shows up the next day in a suit and tie, tries to fix an error on the factory floor, and, rightfully, gets turned away at the door for lack of safety gear. He spends a few days in his office goofing off while the errors on the factory floor grow and grow. The fallout. Finally, around 3 a.m. one night, big production line X goes down. This is a huge contract for the company. The company might go under if this client goes elsewhere. As such, emergency procedures state all C-level execs and even the owner must be notified immediately if this line stops at any time for any reason. So the upper echelon of the company, including VP Buttkisser, assembles in the boardroom to prepare for their firing spree. Around 5 a.m., IT guy is ordered to the boardroom where they really lay into him before they fire him. Threats of blacklisting him in the industry, threats of lawsuits for damages, etc. Of course, there's the condescending, "Now what do you have to say for yourself?" question. The mic drop. He unfolds a few pieces of paper from his pocket and puts them on the table in front of the owner. "This is why I have to wear a suit and tie no matter what. This was my objection because I have to do my job properly. This is the safety officer refusing me entry for lack of safety gear, and this is the record that VP Buttkisser got my emails but never responded." Not a pin drop or cricket chirp could be heard. Just the faint ruffling of pages as the owner read. Finally, he spoke. "Your so-called dress code is officially revoked. VP Buttkisser is no longer allowed to have any authority over you. Please put on safety gear and fix machine TK421. The rest of us will stay here all day until I'm convinced that this problem will never happen again." VP Buttkisser kept his job. He was very good at his namesake after all. but he was transferred to VP of a division that didn't exist and a workforce of one, only him. Rumor has it he's related to the owner somehow, but at least his self-righteousness can't ruin the actual work being done. I was really disappointed that VP Buttkisser didn't get fired, but I guess it's pretty much the same when you're just relegated to the position of VP in charge of making sure this wall over here exists. This next story comes to us from Aramaref. Your working hours are non-negotiable, even though I agreed. Let's jump right in. This happened a couple years ago, but I think of it often, so I thought I'd share. Backstory. I got hired as support and IT business development with ERP-related issues for all 3 shifts, but I can't be at the facility 24/7. Story. I decided to augment my workday schedule by 2 to 3 hours on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays. Wednesdays and Fridays, I had evening appointments that I couldn't miss. I spoke with my manager, who agreed and actually said, "You're an adult, you don't need my permission." Awesome. So I started. Augmented days started between 9:30 and 11:30, depending on the production schedule for that day and on morning meetings, and ended later than the rest of the office personnel, according to the time started. All was going well for a solid 5 months, including preventing a catastrophic ERP failure that would have caused second shift to be unable to report finished goods produced and raw materials consumed, which has, historically, created thousands of dollars of false scrap and hundreds of man-hours fixing it. Suddenly one night, around 2100 hours, I get an email from my manager to his entire staff, saying how he's been very disappointed that some people get to work so late, how all office employees must start work no later than 8:30, no exceptions, and so on. Knowing that him and I have talked about this and he gave me permission, I don't act on it. A couple weeks later, the CIO calls me on my way to work around 9:15 and tells me that my manager asked corporate to fix my compliance. I explained to him everything that has happened, including how the manager approved it. He sighs and tells me to just comply with the order. I tell him that second shift, who really begins heavy system usage at 1800 hours, won't have support and lines could go down. He said, "That's fine. Make sure you email manager, CC me, CEO, head of board, and CFO, explain everything, and ask manager if he still wants you to comply, considering lines would likely go down." So I did. The manager replies all and says that he does indeed want me to comply. Malicious compliance starting the next day. I arrive at work between 8 and 8:25 and leave exactly at 1700. I don't take lunch, so automatically, I work nearly an hour over every day. About a week and a half rolls around and the lines stop. Second shift supervisor calls me around 18:30 and I answer. As the only support, I'm on call until 2200. We speak and I understand that this problem can only be fixed with me physically being there. I live about 40 minutes from work and am not required to come off hours. I have made that trip before, but this was before this situation. I tell the supervisor that there's nothing that I can do remotely and that I will fix the issue first thing in the following morning. I email everyone interested of the situation. Second shift shuts down early and third shift is cancelled. The next day, I get there as usual around 8:15 and fix the issue and first shift can start production. The CIO calls me and asks me why my manager just filed a formal complaint against me, and I explain. Now, keep in mind, my manager can't file a complaint against me since he's my manager. He has to have a sit down with me in HR, but he didn't. Anyway, the CIO and I end the call with him telling me I did the right thing. I thought he was going to fire me. About 30-ish minutes later, the CEO calls me and tells me that he spoke with the CIO and he would like me to start augmenting my schedule again. I reminded him that my manager prohibited it, and he told me, "I don't care what he said, I'm giving you permission, and if he has a problem with it, he can call me." I thanked him and started augmenting again. Lines haven't been down overnight again because of this. Happy-ish ending, the manager was fired last year. I heard the other day that one of the major factors was the situation described above. I hate seeing people get fired, but I'm very glad he's not my manager anymore. My current manager is amazing. It really sounds in this case like the CIO knew that your manager was a bit of a douche and was using you to get rid of the manager because they needed cause. So in this story, I don't think OP was the only one that had some malicious compliance. This next story comes to us from Snarkomancer. You must help newly arrived patients. Let's jump right in. I practice as a licensed optician in Canada. Well, opticians are technically a healthcare profession and regulated similarly to nurses and pharmacists. Much of the jobs are glorified sales positions. Prior to moving into the lab side of the industry, that is the manufacture and finishing of prescription lenses, I worked for an independent optician's practice, first as a student and then when I first got my license. It was a largest practice with 2 doctors and a team of 4 opticians and 4 regular staff. The owner, one of the opticians, was a bit of a handful. See, she wasn't a particularly good optician, she knew very little about the profession or lens technologies, but she was unbelievably savvy business person and had kept her business afloat for over 2 decades. She had this cult-like following amongst the customers for a variety of reasons. First, at least 3/4 of our patients were from the same community and culture as her, sharing things like friends and language. Second, she did offer decent pricing, and on eyewear that can mean a lot of savings. Finally, she allegedly did things with their alleged health insurance that would allegedly be questionable legally. Allegedly. This opinion of my former boss created a very strange environment for the rest of the staff. It meant that a good portion of patients wouldn't actually interact with us, or in some cases speak to us at all. As one can imagine, this made for some awkwardness, and it also made doing our jobs difficult. You can't very well fit someone for eyewear if they actively refuse to speak to you. One day, we got a poor Google review that leveled a number of accusations against the practice, though not at my boss. And among them was a comment about not being properly greeted when they walked into the practice. As a rule, if you weren't with someone and the door opened, you offered a cheery hello. My boss flew into this rage, blasting her usual punching bag for some reason over this, and then turning on the rest of us. A new policy was instituted. No matter what, you must greet new arrivals. Later that week, I was fitting a patient with contact lenses, a type of paid appointment that has a maximum time limit of 90 minutes. They were a regular patient of our clinic, an existing contact lens patient, but were being fitted with a more fiddly type of lens called a multifocal, hence the hour and a half of chair time. The door to the practice opened, and I failed to greet the new arrival, though other staff did say hello. The new arrival, while waiting for their optometrist appointment, began to browse for new glasses without the help of any of us. At this moment, my boss stalked out of her office and snatched the file and pen out of my hands. "Go and help the customer." "But I have a patient." "No, you're going to help the customer." Patient, I'm really sorry. I'll be back." I left the patient sitting there while I approached the customer, who very firmly told me, after I had greeted, that they would not talk to me, only my boss. I shrugged and returned to my patient, angry and embarrassed. I decided to make my point. In the weeks following, every time anyone walked into the store, I stopped what I was doing and went to greet them. Unpacking orders? That can wait, someone's walked in. Cutting lenses on a rush job? That can wait, someone's walked in. Fitting a patient with glasses, or dispensing purchased eyewear? These things can wait, someone's walked in. I was always extremely polite about it, and I always pretended, at least to the patients I would step away from, that it was a bit overwhelming, but like a good soldier, I was going to do my job. 9 out of 10 times the patients would shoo me away because they would only deal with my boss, and that was fine with me. I would be back doing my previous task in no time. Finally, a patient bought into my act and said something to my boss. I was worried it would be a complaint, something to the effect of, "Your staff member walked away from helping me when," but it wasn't. This patient told my boss that it seemed like all of the opticians were juggling too many people, and that I sounded more stressed than normal. Then came the magic words. An optician shouldn't have to stop what he is doing to run over to say hello to someone just to be told to go away while helping me. The following Monday, change was in the air. We had a new rule. Say hello to new arrivals and help them if you can. I left not too long after all this went down, moving to a better job, but the industry is small enough that I know all of that alleged stuff, well, let's just say someone's hands were allegedly red. I honestly think that the boss in this case took that negative review as a personal attack on her, because she sees the business as an extension of herself. That led to the policy of greeting everybody as they come in and going to help them, when in reality it didn't really help the situation, it just made things a lot more difficult in that store. I can't comment too much on the illicit activities happening in that store, but OP, if you're not working there anymore, you could always anonymously report that, just saying. This next story comes to us from Grappling Gigahertz. Manager complains about driving route, saves £5 a month, but costs the company £1,000. Let's jump right in. I had a job some years ago where I needed to visit a different customer's premises every day. There were many of us doing this job across several teams, and the expectation was that you drove using your own car and were paid a mileage rate. There were no company-provided cars. All was fine until I changed from one team to another, and to new manager queried my first mileage claims submitted to them. The location of our office was on the edge of town, and to reach many of our customers, you could either drive on the main road to the next town, which got you there quickly and safely, or you could take some narrow country lanes which were a nightmare to drive through, so everyone obviously used the main road. But the manager had discovered the country lane route was 3/4 of a mile shorter, so 1.5 miles on a round trip. That made 60 pence difference to the mileage claim for each day. A visit to a customer took a whole day. The manager refused to authorize the claims for the main road route and insisted I resubmit with the lower mileage, as that was what the company rules said you could claim. Fine, no problem. The claim for the month was reduced by £5. But then I told them I was no longer going to use my car to drive to customers. Any customers anywhere. There was no obligation in the employment contract to do so. And being in the UK as a long-term employee, there was no way they could get rid of me. The issue was that our customers were not that far away at around 15 miles, but they were mainly in remote areas or on edge of town industrial estates, where there was no direct public transport. If you did try and use public transport, then a 30-minute journey turned into a 2-hour journey with all the connections, and a 1-day customer visit became a 2-day visit, so halving productivity. For the next month's claim, instead of paying about £8 a day in mileage, the company now had to pay for a rental car or taxi, both of which cost around £50 a day. My travel claims now went from around £160 a month to £1,000, all to save £5. After the first month, as the manager had a team of 10 all doing the same work, they initially spent an inordinate amount of time trying to allocate me customers that were on public transport routes. But then, my colleagues in the team, who had also been taken to task by the manager over the same mileage issue and other matters as well, as they could be irritatingly pedantic about many things, saw what was going on and also started to refuse to use their own cars. Eventually, after some months, senior management had to step in when they saw how their travel budget was being exhausted and decreed that people could claim for the sensible route. Most went back to driving, but some of us remained using taxis and rental cars, as there was still no contractual obligation to use your own car. Ah yes, OP really drove the point home to the manager, and I'm guessing it was getting quite tiresome to the manager after a while. I'm glad in the end they were able to take the best route possible and get everybody back rolling. I thank you for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow.